Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Hinata goes back in time to make Naruto happy. Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Naruto breathed. Something he always loved about Konoha was its air. Must have been the tree's fresh oxygen coming in from thousands of leaves every day. Breezes rolled by every few moments, carrying the scent of food from a restaurant or steam and soap from the bathhouses. And the people. Sakura had a habit of using fruity cherry-smelling shampoo, Hinata a different flowery, sweet-smelling one. The few times he'd been hugged by Jiraiya, he caught whiffs of a cologne that was subtle but would probably smell appealing to any woman that got close. Kakashi smelled like dogs. Konoha was quieting down after the alarm of that afternoon. Streetlights came on, restaurants opened their doors. He imagined the Jounin sensei were meeting up for drinks to talk about the students they'd be assigned, or maybe it'd just be Kakashi, Asuma and Guy. The three were close, and Asuma and Kurenai's relationship status wouldn't necessarily mean she was part of the group. She'd always struck Naruto as a very womanly woman, anyway, and Guy time probably wouldn't be something she'd try to join. Iruka, on the other hand, was enjoying his evening at home, blissfully free of any injury, and mulling over the oddity of his student, while Mizuki was cooling his heels in a cell somewhere in Konoha's T&I. Neither had been too pleased with Naruto's dramatic revelation, for different reasons. Of course I knew, you dumb traitor. We're not best friends, but the fox and I share a body. What kind of idiot doesn't know there are two people inside him? Well, him, for one. But all that was past, and now he could sit peacefully in one of the training fields, tease Kurama's chakra enough to get the fox ready to wake up from its self-induced hibernation. Standard, if your host didn't know about your existence, the silence would make anyone go mad otherwise and enjoy the cool, fresh Konoha air. For now, everyone was still on his side, though he'd earned himself a lot of mistrust. He should have been approaching the Hokage to talk about this if he'd figured it out. He should not have been pretending to be a complete idiot if he actually knew what the hell it was he was doing, or at least he shouldn't have been pretending to his teachers and the Hokage. Thankfully, the Mizuki incident was enough to point to as proof that not everyone in Konoha had his best interests at heart. The swishing leaves above the field did a good job to cover up the sound of quiet footsteps, but he'd been alert from the beginning and turned to look for his primary reason for being here. Hinata was good at being unseen, a born tracker. But not quite at the level he was used to, which meant spotting the washed-out tan of her jacket was easy, even for him. Hinata. He watched her tense, ready to run and pretend she hadn't been there, but then she gingerly stepped into the clearing. The woman he knew hadn't been outgoing, but she'd certainly stood taller and fidgeted less. He hadn't actually realized how small she'd been when they were genin. He knew he'd been about Sakura's height at 12, but Hinata was much slighter than either of them. Or maybe it was the jacket. Hey. How have you been? Wanna sit with me? The stars are about to come out. He plopped down where he'd been before, leaning back and watching the treetops, trying to take the pressure off her. She wasn't very good with it right now. Oh okay, she tentatively sat down by him, taking turns looking at the ground and at his face, never actually looking for the lights. Why, you passed the exam? He saw her eyes linger on his forehead protector. Yeah, he let his voice stay low. It was very lucky she'd found him, he hadn't had any idea how to approach her otherwise. Are you alright, Naruto? She asked, voice quiet. Can I tell you something? He asked, keeping his eyes on her face even when she averted hers. I've kinda been lying to everyone. He watched her eyes widen and watched her hunch in on herself some more. No one liked being told their hero wasn't sincere. He kept going, see, when the fourth defeated the Kyuubi, he didn't really kill it. He just sealed it. Into me. The stars really were coming out now, blinking hellos from behind the tree branches. Hinata had gone still and was staring at him, pearly eyes wide. How can that? Lots of countries do it, he explained. It gives them weapons, makes one more strong ninja, or makes sure that tailed beast can't be used against them. The difference here is that the people of Konoha really hate the Kyuubi, so they don't like me too much, either. Oh. He could see her working out the way people ignored him. At first I was just really mad at the fox, you know. He said, turning to her, but I'm guessing the fox didn't really want to be sealed into me, so that's kinda pointless. But then I started thinking if people avoid me just as is, then if I actually seemed like I knew what I was doing, then they might become afraid. She finished for him, wide eyes boring into his. This was the girl he knew. Hinata was smart, careful and competent. Yeah. You've been failing the exams on purpose? She asked, sounding hurt. Most of them. But, you know, I figure even if I do fail, I'll just get up and try again, right? He grinned. And watched her give a small smile back. I'm gonna be Hokage no matter what. A few stupid tests won't stop me. And there it was. Hinata didn't grin, but her smiles had a way of lighting up her whole face. Naruto loved giving in to impulse, especially when it involved things like this. He leaned in and kissed her, eliciting a surprised squeak. A few seconds later, a red-faced Hinata was on the ground in a faint. Naruto turned back to the stars. He breathed. Hinata blushed when Naruto scooted closer, finding her hand and grasping it. At her gentle squeeze, a grin split his face at the seams and she seemed to like it, ducking her face, but smiling. Around them, students were engaging in excited chatter. The 80 focused on in particular were doing as expected. Sakura and Ino were arguing, Shikamaru and Choji were sitting in silence, one munching chips, the other watching Ino, Kiba was preoccupied with Akamaru, Shino was observing the group, Sasuke was ignoring everyone. And Hinata was, of course, sitting beside him, exuding waves of happiness. "I think you'll be with Kiba," Naruto said, keeping his voice down to avoid drawing attention from others. She turned to him, "Why do you think so?" "He's an Inyazuka, so he's probably going to be a tracker. Konoha doesn't have too many teams for that with your Byakugan, you'd be able to help each other sufficiently. Another good candidate would be." He made a show of looking around, Shino. "His bugs would also work for tracking." "You think I'm a tracker?" He could tell she wasn't enthused. Tracking wasn't as glamorous as Neji's combat team or what he knew Hanabi would be destined for spying. "You're really good at it. You've been following me around for a few months now, haven't you?" "Sometimes it's hard to tell if you're there," he said with a smile. Her blush darkened in embarrassment. Sorry, I don't mean." "Nah, it's fine," he said, "it's just like a training exercise, right?" He let her nod, relieved that she took the out. I could only imagine what Sasuke would say if he found someone spying on him. Though his eyes wandered to the two girls squabbling over the chair beside the Uchiha, I don't think he'd be too surprised at that. To his surprise, Hinata giggled, "I know that it's a bit weird, but I admire Sakura and Ino's courage to say things like that out loud." Naruto shrugged, "Out loud's well and good, but we're ninja. We're supposed to be subtle, aren't we?" She again surprised him, with a small laugh. "Not everyone can be as subtle as you, Naruto-kun. If everyone took that route, we wouldn't get anywhere." He gave her hand a squeeze, rewarding the brief courage. "I think I'm doing just fine." Which got the blushing going again, leaving him to look around the room. Haruka walked in soon afterwards, tapping a clipboard with a pen and looking surprised that Naruto was holding the Hyuga girl's hand. He pushed onwards, though, and gave out the team assignments. Hinata looked resigned to tracking, but seemed willing to give it a try. Naruto turned his attention to the pink-haired fangirl and the Avenger. The latter was deliberately keeping his eyes on a bit of floor space to Haruka's right. Sakura was looking for him to send him a glare and seemed surprised to see him with Hinata. He gave her a grin and a thumbs up, which she ignored. Trying a team lunch with Sasuke and Sakura this early on was useless, but Hinata's teammates were ready to give teammate a go, so Naruto left them to it. Hinata received a peck on the cheek in front of both boys before he left, which, he was proud to say, only left her swing on her feet and not actually passed out. The only thing there was to do now would be to find something to read while he waited for Kakashi. He had enough time for a leisurely stroll home to grab the gutsy ninja and then plop down next to Hinata back in the classroom. At her questioning glance, he grinned, "Our sensei's chronically late, this is to read while we wait for him. Have you read it?" She shook her head and he obligingly opened it to the first page, scooting until his entire left side was pressed up against her entire right. He pretended not to notice her raging blush and read calmly, asking her if she was done with the page, then turning it, drumming his fingers against hers or stroking his thumb over her knuckles. The task of turning the pages was left to Hinata after a while, though he did have to stop her once. "Geez, Hinata-chan, I can't read that fast," to get a bit more communication into the act of reading together when it looked like she was getting more into the novel than into him. For all intents and purposes, this was a date. In front of their entire academy class. Hinata's meekness was something that needed to be worked around and he knew that he was one of the best ways to do it. At this rate, by the time the Chunin exams rolled around, she ought to be staring Neji down just as well as he could. Too soon, though, Kurenai was there to collect her genin and he again wished her luck by giving her a kiss on the cheek. This time, though, it wasn't just a smirking Kiba and quiet Shino who could see. Ino and Sakura were both raising their brows, Shikamaru was watching out of the corner of his eye and Kurenai was fixing them with a calculating red stare. Should the Jounin sensei bring it up, Hinata would have to explain herself or would have to explain that she didn't have to explain herself. He again wished her luck, silently. After some team with a kid in a bandana was collected, Team 7 was alone and Sakura came over to ask him if he and Hinata were dating. He gave her a smile. "I hope so," he said, "but I'm not sure. Girls are confusing." He pouted. His acting skills weren't as good as those of someone who had a Sharingan, Sasuke was the exception to this, he just sucked. But they were certainly enough to fool a schoolgirl. Sakura seemed to take his confusion just fine. "I think you are. The important thing is to make a good impression. Ditch the jumpsuit," she advised. He frowned. "Thanks, Sakura, but I'll ask if I need advice." Too unlike the dead last, a little too tactful, but neither genin seemed to notice. Whatever he was planning on Team 7 seeing the thoughtful Naruto, anyway. He ought to let more of himself show, though the more extreme side could wait until duress. He returned to his book and left the two of them to stew. When Kakashi entered, there was no eraser to fall on his head, but he was greeted with two vicious glares and an unimpressed glance over a book. My first impression is I hate you. Meet me on the roof. Sasuke gracefully jumped out the window and used handholds to follow their teacher, and Sakura shakily followed him. Determined to set himself apart, Naruto speedily climbed the stairs, meeting three unamused gazes when he got up there. "Gonna make your teammates wait?" Kakashi asked. "I figured you wouldn't mind so much," he said, "since you were so late. And, anyway, what do we have stairs for if all we're going to do is hop around outside?" Kakashi turned his attention back to the team. "Well, then, my name's Kakashi Haddock. I have many likes and dislikes, my dreams and goals are none of your business, and I think that's about it. Next. Well, I'm Sakura Haruno. I like," she blushed, looking in Sasuke's direction. "My dreams for the future," she blushed again, burying her face in her hands and giggling. Naruto watched Kakashi sweat drop, then coughed. Well, I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I like ramen, being a ninja and Hinata-chan. I don't like washing dishes or shopping, and my dream," he paused. He was here mainly for Hinata, but saying anything like that would seem a bit obsessive. Guess I wanna make Konoha the best it can be." He shrugged. "I'm 12, give him a while to think about it." He turned to Sasuke, aware that Kakashi was filing away his laid-back attitude for the future. Sasuke didn't look at any of them, but kept glaring at the floor. "I don't have a lot of likes, in fact, I hate many things. My ambition, because it will be achieved, is to kill a certain man." Naruto was aware of Kakashi watching their reactions and let a skeptical expression take up his face. This Naruto wasn't gonna take the vow of a 12-year-old seriously. They were all advised not to eat dinner and to show up bright and early the next morning at their designated training field. Which left Naruto with enough time to henge into a busty redeed and get a discount on a small box of cinnamon rolls. Depending on how Hinata's team introductions went, it could be time to initiate their first makeout session. It was probably rather suspicious of Naruto to invite Hinata to his house last night, but in the end, it had all worked out rather well. The girl was sleeping contentedly in his bed, still a virgin. He was trying his hand at making pancakes, and the Hyuga were likely none the wiser, given how little attention Konoha paid its children, and how little attention the Hyuga paid Hinata in particular. Anything involving a skillet was usually easy for him to serve up. It seemed all the easy things were made in a frying pan. Eggs, potatoes, box dinners. Pancakes, however, were not one of those things. The fourth almost black one had him hissing oaths, but luckily, Hinata's appearance put an end to it. At his behest, she took up the spatula, and soon a tower of perfect fluffy flat cakes was forming at her left. Naruto's pouting and mumbling about beginner's luck only served to improve her already spectacular mood. Kurenai's orders were to meet at 9 in the morning, and Kakashi's were to do the same at 6:30, though Naruto knew they would also be meeting with the copy nin at 9, so after breakfast, only a few kisses were exchanged before Hinata went on her way home to change, and Naruto headed for training field 7 to finish the gutsy ninja. Sakura angrily asked him why he was late by an hour and a half, but he just shrugged, gesturing to the empty field. "You see sensei around anywhere?" Kakashi did show up eventually, though, brandishing his bells and boxed lunches, and gleefully crushing any hopes the young genin might have had of pushing through as a team. Or so he hoped. The grin that spread across Naruto's face wasn't something he really let people see. But it was useful in this case, since it usually gave them the impression that there was a lot to Naruto that they didn't know, and that was what he wanted. Both Sasuke and Sakura were intrigued by the sudden deviation from the norm, and the girl laid up his explanation about teamwork being the answer, while the Avenger reluctantly swallowed it in short bursts. "Just what do you think you're doing?" Kakashi said menacingly. Naruto scoffed, "They're eating lunch. I didn't follow your bogus no breakfast rule, but they were trusting enough to, so while I distracted you, they got their strength back. Now we're ready to kick your one-eyed butt as a team." Kakashi seemed to be having a hard time deciding whether they passed or not, but they did, and the surprised looks Naruto got from the other two genin were a good sign. Better they begin taking him seriously now than later, when it could be a danger if Sasuke defected again. The fox wasn't happy to be woken from his slumber. What could a gangly preteen possibly know that would interest him? Lots. Lots and lots. Kurama was salivating at the prospect of revenge against Madara, Urabito, and Naruto was glad to give it to him. Both knew they had to be patient, had to bide their time and choose their steps cautiously, and neither particularly trusted the other at this stage, but there was excitement in the air. Good or bad, something would be happening soon, the wave mission being the first upcoming event that the Nine Tails would play a part in, and that was enough for the Chakra Beast, for now. With the promise of a fight in a month's time, Kurama settled down to sleep again. At this stage, Hinata was a well-meaning but useless fighter. Which sucked. As a tracker, she was well ahead of the game. Had the Hyuga ever been interested in anything more than her ability as a fighter, they would have discovered that Hinata had a talent for remaining unseen and seeing what people tried their hardest to hide. Granted, with Byakugan, that was a given, but it came to more than that. Small scuffs left by ninja sandals, pupil dilation, the direction a woman's legs crossed at a table. Things that people could brush off as coincidence, but ninja knew to never take as such. Naruto wasn't worried about Hinata's advancement with Team 8. She'd do fine with them, better than fine, as tracking was what they were being specifically trained to do. But such specification left little time for combat. It was assumed each member was practicing outside lessons in addition to what they did with their Jounin sensei, which meant that the occasional combat assessments instead of extensive training made sense. But Hinata's practice would have been with the Hyuga clan, devoid of any encouragement and certainly devoid of any use of her natural talents. Therefore, Naruto thought as he dodged a senbon, his intervention was needed here as well. Another senbon hit him near the collarbone, causing a stinging sensation somewhere in his left pectoral muscle. She was getting pretty good with those. It was probably time to move on. During training, Naruto continued to play up his thoughtful side, usually being the one to propose alternate and occasionally gruesome tactics to win. On the rare occasion Kakashi had them working on something other than combat. Sakura was usually the one to come up with plans during D ranks, but that didn't stop the Sasuke from glancing his way and expecting him to say something. He considered being more violent in his pursuit of Tora whenever that one came up but decided against it, guessing malevolence wasn't what the Hokage needed to be seeing from him, with the whole Kyuubi thing being thrown up into the air. Alongside the day-to-day problems, he had the dilemma of whether or not to tell his team about his Jinchuriki status. To strengthen the team? Or would it make things awkward? Maybe after wave. After they'd seen what the Nine Tails chakra could do. Ordinarily, Hinata's blushes were a bit of an annoyance, a reminder that she was much shyer than she would be, but considering where this blush was, he wasn't complaining too much. It turned out that she chose to wear a tank top under her jacket today, leaving a lot of skin for him to leave hickeys on once the jacket came off. He could feel her get a bit panicky once his mouth got lower, but he kept his teeth mostly on her neck and collar area, only leaving a small red mark where her began, and she took it well. He was especially pleased when her mouth found his neck. She wasn't quite as forceful as he was, only giving gentle bites, but under the influence of encouraging sounds and sentences like "Whoa, Hinata," she did leave a rather impressive mark on his neck. What really got him excited was when her hands got under his shirt. Despite their general aversion to his boxers, her nails grazing his hips were just as distracting as he remembered. So distracting, in fact, that he ended up finding a bruise on his back from picking her up and dropping into a more comfortable sitting position against a tree. He had a couch. Why did he choose to do this in a park? And he grudgingly admitted liking the cool down bit too, because cuddling with Hinata tended to be fun. He'd find out about ticklish spots he didn't know she had, thumb wrestler, play rock paper scissors, chat about the day. It was a pretty great way to get her to open up. He definitely had a girlfriend and she was on her way to becoming the woman he knew. Wave would bring about another opportunity to keep her growing. It would give her some incentive to try harder in her training, not that she wasn't already. She was Hinata, after all. He decided to come back with some scars. Better he be the first one to get them than her. That being decided, he gave her a squeeze and brought his mouth down to blow in her ear. She giggled and he kissed her temple and, finding that her mouth wasn't too much of a detour, went thereafter. No, he thought reverently, mouth returning to the spot above her cleavage to leave a darker hickey. He didn't mind her blushes very much at all. Hinata liked Naruto. Especially his kisses. Idly, she wondered if maybe doing this on his bed wasn't the best idea. But he was really good at it and she didn't want to stop. She wasn't exactly a natural at kissing, she reflected. The first few times were fine, she just kept moving her lips against his, in a kind of rhythm. But then tongue came into it and it all got a little more complicated. Naruto was very nice about it, though, breaking apart and telling her patiently that she just had to move hers in circles and it'd be fine. At this point she knew her face was very hot, but she didn't want to faint again, so she pushed past the dizziness. Which was a very good decision because, apparently, after tongue came hands and that was something she definitely needed to be awake for. Naruto didn't help her with this one, leaving her to figure out what to do with hers. His were on her waist, he had one leg up on the bed for balance and she mirrored him to help with the reach. She liked how he kept moving his thumb over her ribs. It tickled, but in an okay way. Hers just stayed where they were. One on the bed, the other in her lap. It felt a bit lame and she kinda wished he'd tell her where to put them since he seemed to be such a professional. What with the tickling and the gripping just tight enough that she felt like a girl, but he stayed quiet. Mostly because his mouth was busy. That didn't last too long. Once it became apparent she didn't know what else to do, Naruto pulled his tongue out of her mouth, put his hands back on the bed and gave her a few kisses before stopping. That was really nice, he said, grinning, wanna do it again sometime? She nodded, bright red but smiling and, surprising herself, took his hand. And then they talked. About their teams, about their academy classmates. About her family. About the Kyuubi. She wasn't sure how it could be possible they'd never spoken to each other before yesterday, but it was the least awkward thing in the world. Maybe that was just what it was like to talk to Naruto. Naruto pushed her harder in her training than anyone. And he made her push herself harder than she'd ever thought she could. Because when she didn't get something, like a flip or a block, he wasn't disappointed or indifferent, like her family, and he didn't shrug it off, like her teammates. It wasn't exactly a case of not a problem, try again. When she didn't dodge fast enough or push past hesitation with her strikes, he seemed upset. She couldn't exactly describe it, it felt like a kind of frustration, I know you can do it, so why aren't you? Which, while stressful, she also found could be a spectacular motivator. He knew she could do it, why wasn't she? Senbon were pretty easy for her, though, with her eyes. And they were very useful for making Naruto slower and stiffer in his movements, both huge disadvantages they'd found when it came to fighting her. From the look on his face, he'd realized it was easy for her, too, which meant they'd be moving on to something different soon. She'd keep a few senbon on her from now on, though. They worked. She'd finally figured out her hands. If she just kept moving them around his general torso area or gripping his shoulders when he picked her up, she was good. She liked putting them in his hair, though, so she tried to avoid situations where she was off the ground, even if Naruto liked keeping his arms around her. His lap was often the best option in these cases. True to stereotypical boy form, Naruto was fascinated with the skin her tank top was showing, leaving lava bites all over her neck and collar, and making her stiffen when they went lower, because if he asked her to get shirtless in a forest, they would have problems. She did her best to keep up, spurred on by how his breathing got heavy and his mutterings of her name and, with some guesswork, left a fairly dark hickey just below his ear. Probably not a very convenient place, but neither was her entire neck. She hoped he'd get some teasing from his teammates about it if she had to endure Kiba wiggling his eyebrows again. After a few more kisses, they cooled down. In between deep breathing and mutterings of 1, 2, 3, 4, I declare thumb war there was some talking about the day, some teasing, and a lot of cuddling and hair sniffing, the latter mostly from Naruto. She did enjoy the scent of his shirt, though. Sometimes, though, Naruto would get quiet. The same kind of quiet from that day in the clearing. The I'm hiding something quiet. She tried to ignore it, instead dominating his opposable digit while he was distracted. He was back to her soon enough, with more kissing and staring at what little of her cleavage the shirt exposed. She couldn't decide whether she should bear a few hours of discomfort and try to do this again sometime with a proper bra just to see his reaction, or if she ought to wear something high collar to dissuade any more sucking on her neck. Due to the look on Naruto's face, the former was winning out. Naruto was upset. No, not upset. There were actually no words to describe how fucking pissed he was. Being from the future, he'd expected his ability to foresee things would have been a whole lot better than this. He'd vastly underestimated his effect on Hinata's bravery and what makeout sessions did for intimacy. It was all well and good when they were 16, they were true ninja, veterans, then, and intensity was just the way life was. You enjoyed every drop of your ramen, every hit you landed on your opponent, because your life expectancy was highly reduced and you just didn't live half-assed. Even Shikamaru was 100% invested in his cloud watching. But NOW Naruto had some difficulty scowling with the rapidly increasing size of his canines, but he managed it, now they were 12. Forget all the shit Team 7 went up against at 12, Hinata was a tracker, not a combat specialist. She wasn't supposed to be going up against an S-class missing nin when she'd barely hit adolescence, and how the flying fuck did he miss this? Naruto. Hold on a second. Team 7, plus one drunk geezer, turned to see Hinata Hyuga jog up to them. She placed a small scroll in his hands and planted a light kiss on his cheek. There's a few lunchboxes in there, she turned to the other four, enough for everyone. Back to him, I wanted to wish you luck on your first C rank. The gesture would be seen through by everyone except Izuna, now that it was established he wasn't the tactless dead last he'd pretended to be in the academy, but no one would comment, so he rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly and gave her a quick peck on the lips. The one thing he didn't manage was the blush and whatever pheromones he was supposed to be giving off with his embarrassment. Thanks Hinata. Lek. Tizuna snorted, save the drama for later, eh? I've gotta get home. What's the matter, old man? Naruto asked, someone after you? Gee, after me. You've got some crazy ideas, brat. Tizuna scoffed, determinedly turning away and walking out of the gates. Sasuke and Sakura began following him, Kakashi sticking around to bring up the rear. Naruto to his surprise, Hinata had activated her Byakugan, that man he's lying. I know, he said quickly, ditching the shy tone he'd been using previously, very aware of Kakashi's eye on him, but not really able to do anything right now. Don't worry about it, it's probably nothing. She didn't buy it. There are no coincidences. Her tone was firm. He gave her another kiss, this time on her forehead. To his great annoyance, she was getting tall. He'd missed 3 years with her. She could have gone past his height at any time then, and he might have only caught up right before he'd returned. He prayed that wasn't the case. Should the 3-year trip with Jiraiya not occur this time around, he didn't want to have to be wearing heeled sandals to walk next to his girlfriend. I know, he tried again, but I need to see this through to the end. Kakashi definitely heard that, and he was definitely going to kill him if Naruto held on to any information that could keep his team safe. Damn it. She looked upset with him, but gave him one tight hug and let him go. The trio up ahead of the copy Nin and Naruto had stopped to let them catch up, and they didn't hurry, moving far enough away that Hinata couldn't overhear before Naruto felt the pressure to explain his statements from his sensei. It was just a guess. He attempted to placate the Jounin. Gatu's monopoly on everything important for wave survival means he probably won't be too happy with the development of the bridge. He likely sent someone after Tazuna. Kakashi nodded, makes sense. What doesn't is you holding out on us. A stern eye met his blue ones. Make no mistake, Naruto, if I find that you intend to harm your teammates, I will do what is necessary. This was about his contact with the Kyuubi, Naruto was sure of it. My team, sensei, is all I've got. Along with Iruka, the old man and Hinata. Don't insult me by assuming my contact with my tenant would change that. A smile replaced a frown immediately, and a gloved hand ruffled his hair. I didn't mean anything like that. Naruto snorted and shoved his hands into his pockets before running up and joining Team 7. They were getting along much better than before, what with Naruto's pushing Sasuke to push Sakura, who, in turn, became a lot more normal toward her crush. At this point in time, Naruto would say that the only girl in Konoha in their age range worth admiring would be 10-10. He boiled the basic requirements for being a ninja down to 3 things. Talent, determination and an understanding that life could be pretty sad. With a year of experience over the rookie 9, as well as several years of knowing both Neji and Rock Lee, 10-10 had, in addition to her natural ability and drive, a healthy tolerance for the sorrowful facts of existence. Hinata was close behind. She grew up in a nearly all-ninja family, with oppression and disdain from all sides, due to her poor performance in combat, which, though he didn't like to think of it this way, would help her toughen up, and with Naruto's intervention, her talent and desire to succeed were both blossoming. Sakura and Ino, on the other hand, well, they had talent, unkempt and poorly groomed as it was, and determination, though that was all wrong, too. The main thing he had to do with Sakura was to get her focused on improving for herself. Slowly, with Sasuke's help, they were getting there. Ino was someone else's problem. She was farther along in maturity than Sakura, anyway, and with Choji and Shikamaru's grounding influences, she'd turn out fine. Sasuke was a problem all on his own. Really, now that Naruto thought about it, each member of Team 7 just needed attention. Sakura, typically forgotten between the Avenger and the Jinchuriki, needed someone to give her the focus and training she needed to unlock her potential, found in Tsunade. Sasuke, drama queen that he was, couldn't sit still and wait patiently to learn everything on his level before moving on to the next, so when Orochimaru offered a way to jump past the traditional path of learning and start working with the big stuff right away, he took it. Regretfully, Jiraiya didn't go for any of that quick fix shit. If Naruto wanted anything, he had to get it from the bottom up. That one move that must have taken about half a second to do that one time when that drunk tried to take my money. Let's see those Academy katas again. A double attack with toads. How's your summoning time? It was long, frustrating and hard, but it had him reciting theory in his sleep, which worked to help him create his own fighting style and jutsu. Naruto was good with creativity. Sasuke also had the potential to be good with creativity. As a rule, he was pretty by the book, only thinking to step over the line when it was necessary, like during the bell test or when he decided he needed to become a missing nin to fulfill his ambition. He just worked at what he was given, never working with it, and that had to change. Naruto jumped to put an arm around the Uchiha, ignoring his annoyance and gesturing to the beautiful scenery. What's wrong with this picture? Sasuke scowled, looking decidedly unimpressed with the whole thing before his eyes fixed on the puddle and widened. Squelch. Bits and pieces of Kakashi littered the ground. Naruto grabbed for his kunai and began stirring up the chakra near the seal. Kurama would want to be awake for this. Oi, Naruto. We want to talk. Sasuke said. Sakura nodded her agreement. Pleasantly surprising. Naruto let his fishing line rest on the ground, grinning when the black-haired boy rolled his eyes and pulled up some beach next to him, Sakura reluctantly taking his other side. What about? That chakra. From when we were fighting Zabuza. What was that? To tell or not to tell? You tell me. Don't do this. Sakura burst out, surprising both boys. I get that you're different from who you were in the academy. I mean, I'm not even sure if you're the same person at this point, she said, frowning at him, but you said it yourself, the day of the bell test, we're a team. Sasuke nodded, if you're going to suck me into this teamwork stuff, you'd better contribute, too. Oh, what the hell? I hold the nine-tailed demon fox in my stomach. That Sakura began angrily, then stilled as Sasuke's nods reached her. It makes sense, the Avenger said, eyes on the line. It's why the villagers treated you like they did, isn't it? Naruto. Sakura gaped. The blonde shrugged, I had to act dumb until I graduated so they couldn't hold me back out of fear. But now that I've got this, he tapped his forehead protector, I'm free to say and do as I please. Which would bring me to my next point. The grin was back. These two and Hinata were the only ones who'd seen it, he'd been careful about that. As someone who's spent a large portion of their life working to keep from showing any signs that I'm disloyal to Konoha, I can say with a fair amount of certainty that you, Sasuke, are showing an alarming number of them, he said cheerfully. The Uchiha watched him warily as he turned to Sakura, and you, Haruno, are entirely too self-conscious. Both traded looks before Sakura began babbling 100 miles a minute and Sasuke retreated behind his long bangs to brood. Naruto let the grin stay on his face for a while, calmly picking up the fishing line and reeling in a giant clump of seaweed. Naruto. He jumped, whirling around with 3 kunai ready to be flung at whomever it was who'd snuck up on him, coming face to face with Hinata. That wasn't okay. What are you doing here? He asked, stowing the knives, but not making any move to approach her. She was supposed to be in Konoha, doing whatever it was teammate did during Team 7's trip to Wave. She took his aloof stance as a sign he didn't quite believe it was her and pointed at her chest, face coloring a little, and showing him the lava bite that, supposedly, no one else but the two of them would know about. Now that he really looked at her, though, he saw that she looked more than a little disheveled. She'd zipped her jacket open, either to cool down or better show him the mark, and her skin glistened with sweat. Her hair was a mess and she was breathing heavily. She must have tracked him here from Konoha. Her story confirmed it. I couldn't let you walk into a trap, she said, if what that man was involved in ended up with you getting hurt and I'd known it could happen, I couldn't forgive myself, she said. He swore. She jumped. Hinata, I really appreciate this, but we're ninja. Something like a bogus mission was bound to happen sometime. She looked repentant, maybe realizing how foolish it was to pack up and leave the village just like that, but it didn't seem like she was entirely against coming here. Because, he realized, at least she now had peace of mind, knowing that he was safe. This wasn't right, he thought as he relieved the Hyuga of her pack and began walking leisurely back to Tsunade's. Though he knew Hinata had admired him at this point in time, she hadn't been this dependent. But, he thought, she had been incredibly self-conscious. On some level, maybe even downtrodden to the point of being damaged. The Hyuga were her life back then, but now he'd forced himself into it and he was immediately her focus. How much attention had he given her? Training, dates, long sessions of lip-locking in the dark, all far more intense than a girl who'd been previously overlooked could expect. How terrifying it must be for her to see him risk himself when he was the one person who thought she had any value. Now taking notice of how much she looked like a kicked puppy, he dropped the disapproving aloofness and took her hand. She gave him a disbelieving look, almost melting when he kissed her temple. I missed you, his mouth trailed up her jaw. Let explaining this shit to Kakashi wait. Kakashi again couldn't seem to decide between rewarding the bizarre situations Naruto triggered or stopping them before the waves grew chaotic in size. Sheer dumb luck and the remnants of Hinata's exhaustion actually being from their spontaneous kissing, sweaty hair, flushed cheeks and a lip that she was worrying to the point of splitting the skin to hide any potential swelling, had the Jounin reluctantly saying that her loyalty to her comrade was admirable and that she had his permission to accompany them for the duration of their mission to Wave, though she had better be prepared for danger and for a chewing out when she got home. So Hinata was on the bridge with them during the extremely dangerous fight with Zabuza and Haku. Alright. He could deal with that. Sakura was there, after all, and she might have even been behind Hinata in development. So Hinata was joining in the battle. Well, fine. He couldn't exactly expect her to sit out once fighting started. The whole reason she was here was to make sure nothing happened to him. Hinata being in Haku's mirror dome while Sasuke assisted Kakashi, he was not okay with. Kurama was excited, wanted a real battle, but Naruto held back. Hinata, she was holding her own. This was probably the easiest type of training for her, with her Byakugan and her flexibility. It was like watching a dancer. Haku, realizing this, upped the speed and suddenly Hinata was jerking her hand towards herself, digits bloody from a senbon that, despite missing its target, did hit a finger and didn't look like it hit just any old tendon. The pain was enough of a distraction to mess up her following 3 dodges and had the ice user gearing up for the same attack that, in another timeline, almost killed Sasuke Uchiha. Naruto gathered chakra into his legs, pushed Hinata out of the way and let the needles slam into him. Kurama hissed in frustration, just what was the point of that? But Naruto used this opportunity to turn to Hinata and give a big smile, with her Byakugan she'd see it even if she was gaping at the bridge's woodwork right now. I don't think you get that you getting hurt here is just as painful for me as me getting hurt is for you, he said, especially when this is my mission in the first place, Hinata. It wouldn't help with the hero complex, but he'd deal with that later. Hiding a blackout, he clumsily grabbed a fistful of needles at one time and pulled out. The fox grumbled, but at least they were getting somewhere now. Hot chakra rushed to the damaged vessels and flesh, quick fixing anything that needed it so that he'd be good until he could actually lie down and give himself some attention. More energy, hotter still and volatile, jumped up to form into a snake-like tail. One, he said in his head firmly, but there was already too much chakra circulating and a twin formed near it. He jumped, moving from mirror to mirror, the energy making them snap like toothpicks. A fist shrouded in energy had the young prodigy flying over to Sasuke, whose brand spanking new Sharingan didn't quite prepare him for a body hitting him in the side of the face. Naruto turned back to Hinata, Kurama settling down a bit and withdrawing the majority of what he'd just deposited into the blonde. His skin was still hot when Naruto pulled his girlfriend up, but she either didn't mind or was still too numb. Or, he guessed as her eyes fluttered down, she was exhausted and chakra depleted. He set her down away from any shards of ice and jumped over to where Kakashi was charging up a Chidori. Remnants of the fox's chakra would be flushed out over the rest of the week by his own system, but enough was still there that he didn't feel tired or sore like the rest of Team 7 and was perfectly fine carrying Hinata back to his place while she napped. The hormone fest in the Hokage's office tired her out enough for her not to object to a piggyback ride. He sort of expected her to fall asleep since she would have been tired from traveling to and from Konoha as well as from the fight. It had all happened over the course of a few days, after all, and she probably hadn't slept or ate to compensate for it. He set her down on his bed, covering her with a light blanket since she was wearing her jacket, then grabbed some clothes, his towel, and went to shower. There was currently a big problem here, one that he wasn't entirely sure of how to solve. On the plus side, Hinata's ability and self-confidence were growing at a very nice rate. His assurance that he thought she was a good ninja and a cool pretty girl were helping her improve much faster and better than before. But before, she was doing this herself or with her teammates and teachers. Now, Naruto was pushing growth that he turned the knob hard, accidentally making the water colder than he was prepared for she might not be ready for. She'd had 3, maybe 4 years to sort this all out on her own. He'd assumed that with his intervention they could speed that up, but he hadn't taken things like this into account. Granted, there were worse people, in Konoha, even, to have hero complexes for, and great amounts of trust would be good to have when he was coming out of the closet with his relationship with the Nine Tails and whatever mess Gaara and Orochimaru would cook up soon. But she was Hinata. A lot more important than just anyone. Just what was he supposed to do now? He was loath to act with apathy toward her, not only would it mirror the actions of her family, but it could also lead to even more unpredictable results. No matter how unlikely a scenario with Hinata leaving the leaf was, he didn't doubt that, somehow, he could make it happen. The only thing he could think of would be to work with her on stuff that he, himself sucked at, like medical jutsu, or theory. He hated medical jutsu. He and chakra control were the worst matchup ever. But he attempted to find the doorknob blindly, face covered by a towel, and knocked into a very awake Hinata on his way out. Her health depended on this. He set the kettle for several cups of instant ramen to share, smiling when he saw 2 scrolls of hers on the counter and another jacket of hers on a hook in the entryway. If he wasn't mistaken, she had a toothbrush in his bathroom, as well. She wasn't staying here permanently, but more often than not, they were sharing his apartment. Was that a good thing? He liked it. It was easier to start this comfortably now, rather than have an awkward "are you moving in" discussion later on. By Chunin she would have enough freedom to live away from the Hyuga compound. He covered the ramen to keep any steam from escaping, while the noodles rehydrated and sat down to wait. Hinata's changes were something to keep a closer eye on, he decided. She didn't necessarily need to be exactly the same as before, but he was pretty sure heavy deviation from what she'd become then wouldn't have a good outcome. Though, a smile spread across his face at the sight of a fuchsia bra strap, he wasn't going to complain if it led to her wearing things like that. She caught his eye and fingered it nervously, a blush spreading across her face. It's new. I like it, he said, and pushed a cup of ramen towards her. In danger of defecting or not, Sasuke knew that Konoha had produced 3 very impressive ninja over the course of its growth. One of whose habits Naruto was especially familiar with and who wasn't currently training an apprentice. Have you ever thought about sealing as a specialty? Naruto asked Sasuke during a team lunch. Sakura's eyebrows went up into her hair. The Avenger remained quiet, waiting for an explanation. Jiraiya is not training anyone right now, is he? Sakura gaped. Hold on, you can't just waltz up to the Toad Sage and ask him for an apprenticeship. Naruto shrugged. I won't. Sasuke will. And you'll be going up to Tsunade. Even if we could, Sasuke said, chewing thoughtfully, Tsunade hasn't been in the village for years. And Jiraiya wouldn't be easy to find, either. Naruto grinned, with the Chunin exams coming up, he'll be here soon. And I've got a pretty good idea of how to sway him. He smirked. It wasn't the dangerous grin that they knew meant they ought to shut up and listen when it appeared, but it was intriguing enough that both stopped eating momentarily to catch what he was saying. You know those books Kakashi's always reading? Icha. Well, on top of being one of the Densetsu no Sannin, our favorite sage is also the author, leading to the conclusion that he's a giant pervert. Sakura looked ready to impale his eye with her chopsticks, and Sasuke wasn't too far behind. He waved a placating hand, and I happen to have a jutsu that no pervert can resist. Of course, having worked so hard on it, I'm not about to reveal its secrets to anyone. Should someone with a certain dijutsu capable of copying techniques catch sight of it, though, that's the stupidest plan ever, Sasuke scoffed. It's the best one we've got, Naruto corrected, no ninja's keen on revealing their secrets, and you need a teacher who you take seriously, otherwise you won't be in Konoha for very long. Ichigo rolled his eyes, why are you so certain I'll defect if I get so much as bored on a mission? It's all in the way you present yourself, Sasuke, Naruto said emphatically, and reached for more rice. Naruto pulled back for air, smiling at a beaming Hinata, what was that for? I put Neji on defense. Time seemed to slow. That's fantastic. And terrifying. It was just for a short while, and we weren't practicing with gentle fist, it was just an assessment of our skills with weapons, but I had him retreating for a few moves. She was favoring her left side, which brought him to the conclusion that those few moves were swiftly reciprocated by the genius, and with more zeal than usual. Thank you so much. Her mouth was on his again, her left hand eagerly grasping his hair while her right cupped her side. He laughed, what did I do? It was all you. Except this probably hadn't happened in the previous timeline, meaning that it was partly his doing, which begged the question. Just what was Hinata hiding? How much of her skill set was unused or untouched because no one had bothered with it? Her smile was dazzling, so he took advantage of the fairly secluded training ground to slip her the tongue, surprised again at her eager acceptance. In fact, she was getting quite a bit more enthusiastic than usual, taking the lead herself. Her tongue was tagging his and darting back into her mouth, making him go after it with his own, her left hand coming down from his hair to move along his neck, then his chest, down to his abdomen and then back up, now under the cloth of his shirt. He breathed in sharply through his nose when she fingered the waistband of his pants, pulling apart and shoving his face into the crook of her neck to hide his expression. That was unusually assertive. Fantastic, but unexpected. That was really something. I think you're making me a little too excited, though. He moved his mouth over and blew in her ear, pleased with the resulting shiver. I mean, really, Hinata, I'm a boy. Just what do you think you're doing to me? The results were both a relief and a disappointment. Her cheeks tinged pink and she pulled away, ducking her head and making him sigh. I was just teasing. I really liked it. He awkwardly nosed her chin back up so she faced him, your kisses are the best. Under his lips, her pulse was faster than ever before. He pulled away with a sigh, come on, let's look at those ribs. I think they're really bothering you. Sakura's been talking to me about you, Kakashi said musingly, not looking up from his porn as he walked casually beside Naruto. Yeah? The blonde's eyes scrunched up, what did she say? Oh, this and that, the jounin hummed. Naruto sighed. Something he really hated was Kakashi's tendency to skirt around the subject when he was curious. It was something everyone picked up, eventually. An interrogation tactic that could lead to your interviewee leaking something accidentally. Kakashi-sensei, you don't really trust me, do you? He asked in a monotone. Is it because I'm so different from when I was in the academy or is it the Kyuubi? The copy nin looked ready to deny everything, but his surprised expression quickly melted off his face. A somber Kakashi Haddock met Naruto's gaze and gave a shrug. I don't really have any reason to. But the change between yourself from the academy and the one on Team 7 now is a lot more drastic than expected. You've spoken to the Hokage, right? Even he is surprised. Their sandals echoed loudly on the gravel. Neither was attempting to keep quiet and he was finding the scuffling sounds comforting. The lamps left big yellow circles on the ground. Somewhere farther ahead, a woman was walking with two giant shopping bags. He would have asked if she wanted help, but doubted anyone would accept his help now, what with him being the despicable demon and all. Naruto gave another, louder sigh through his nose. I'm still the same. I still want to be Hokage, I guess. I still like ramen and training. I thought you didn't know what your goal was, the older shinobi prompted. I know I want to stay in Konoha, Naruto emphasized. I know I want Team 7 to stay together and I know I want to stay with Hinata-chan. What makes you think Team 7 won't last? Kakashi said quietly. It might, Naruto allowed, we're getting better with teamwork and are taking each other seriously now that I'm not playing dumb. And your constant teasing about Sasuke going missing nin would help steer him back towards staying with the Leaf, Kakashi added. The blonde nodded, yup. But Sasuke's ambition is still his obsession, and if it doesn't look like we're getting him there, he'll leave. And this would be why you brought up Jiraiya? Kakashi asked. Sealing takes longer to learn than everyday assassination techniques. But it's hard to learn, and a challenge for Sasuke would be worthwhile, since it would feel like he was doing something. He needs to feel like he isn't wasting his time. Naruto stuffed his hands in his pockets, and I doubt a Sannin would take any whiny bullshit from him, even if all it was brooding, he added as an afterthought. Kakashi hummed, alright. I'll see if I can't convince Jiraiya-sama to give Sasuke a few moments of his time when he's in town. Naruto grinned, a very pleasant feeling of relief spreading throughout him. Kakashi had been Minato's student, so Jiraiya would feel connected to him that way. If Kakashi brought it up to him, maybe the sage would consider training the Uchiha. They kept walking silently until Kakashi said, in a much lighter tone of voice, so, Hinata-chan, huh? Would she be the cause of all those red marks on your neck? The flustered expression bloomed on the Genin's face, stay out of it. What kind of sensei would I be if I did that? The Jounin said with an eye smile, a word of advice, my pupil, invest in a comfortable scarf. Then he turned around abruptly, ending the conversation, and walked off to wherever it was that he lived. Naruto stood there gaping, wondering who it could be that was leaving hickeys all over Kakashi's neck before he decided that he really didn't want to know and quickly finished the walk home. In this timeline, he and Konohamaru weren't as close as they'd been before, but they still knew each other, so when the boy bumped into a hostile group of Tsunin, even without an angry Sakura chasing them, he guessed it was fate, he jumped in to help. The one irritating thing was that he was on a date with Hinata at the time, and this meant he'd probably have to talk to her some more about being a Jinchuriki. It wasn't that he was uncomfortable with the topic, he just didn't have much to say without bringing his contact with the Kyuubi into it, and it seemed a bit too soon to start referring to Kurama as a friend and whatnot. Boy. Sannin. Drop him. He's just a kid, Naruto said. Belief Genin, huh? Kankuro said, voice lilting with arrogance, how about we have some fun before the boss gets here? Save it for the exam, Naruto said, and put the kid down. What's going on? Sakura's voice came from behind him, what are Sannin doing in Konoha? And isn't that the Hokage's grandson? At this, Temari gave her brother a pointed look, and the puppet user looked ready to let the boy go without any more argument anyway, but a stone from Sasuke, enjoying the super cool atmosphere of a high branch, had him dropping Konohamaru painfully onto the ground. Hinata used this moment to give the kid a quick glance over and a pick-me-up in the form of a hair ruffle. A really cute moment for anyone looking. Kankuro, stop it. Or I'll kill you. Everyone's attention turned to the reed hanging upside down from a tree branch. Gaara looked as apathetic as ever. His eyes were still darkened by lack of sleep, mimicking the rings around a raccoon's, and his gourd still clung to his back, bulky as ever. Sasuke's eyes narrowed, and his mouth formed a smirk in anticipation of a fight with the other boy. There was nothing the Avenger loved more than testing himself. Naruto, however, smiled in greeting. Good. Now we can all be friends. You're here for the exams, right? Sasuke looked at him, wondering at his tone. His subpar acting skills were making a show, the smile on his face completely fake. It looked like it was starting to creep Hinata out, even. My name is Gaara of the Sand. Yours? The one-tail container asked the dark-haired Genin. Sasuke Uchiha, the boy answered almost distractedly. Naruto took the opportunity to wish the other team good luck. Maybe we'll see each other in the exams. It was enough to send them on their way and got him 3 strange looks from the others around him once they were gone. Sasuke frowned, what was that about? The blonde's expression mirrored the Avengers, that guy. His chakra is really strange. A large amount of it is concentrated in that gourd, Hinata said, chakra vessels around her eyes bulging. Sasuke gave her a thoughtful glance and followed her gaze in the direction of the 3 siblings, though they were outside his range of vision by now. Naruto kissed her cheek as reward for the very ninja assessment of a potential threat. What was up with his eyes? Sakura asked. It's like my whiskers, Naruto said, frowning, but I think he actually doesn't get any sleep. So they're from the fox. She mused, now eyeing his face with interest and making Naruto frown. You think I carved up my own face for fun one day or something? The scars weren't a big deal, since he couldn't even remember getting them, but he could feel them changing in fights, like phantom pain from old wounds, and he knew that at some point his skin had, for whatever reason, split evenly in 6 places on his face. He'd have to discuss it with the 9 tails next time. She looked a little sheepish, but not too apologetic. Sasuke continued, he's a Jinchuriki, and his marks are like a raccoon. Which one is that? The one tail, Naruto answered. Has an affinity for sand, and they're from Suna. It fits. The force shifted, Konohamaru had run off with his friends as soon as the sand nin departed. What now? Hinata and I are gonna get back to our date. We'll just all have to watch our back around him, he furrowed a brow, his voice that wasn't the tone of someone who's sane. The other members of Team 7 exchanged looks. Naruto squeezed Hinata's hand and steered her away. Did what Sakura said bother you? Hinata asked him once they were ways away, wide eyes boring intensely into his. Did it seem that way? Not really. The streets were mostly empty here, what with it being a bit later in the day, so he took the opportunity to put a hand on her waist and guide her torso a little closer to his. Her arm came around his side and did the same without any more prompting. "I want you to know," she said determinedly, "that I really don't care. About the Kyuubi. You're Naruto, and that's what matters." On her face was the same expression she wore when fighting, and he knew if he argued, which he wouldn't, but hypothetically she'd shoot down everything he'd say. He knew what he wanted to say, "I love you." But it might have been a little early for that, or not the right time. Personally, he was a fan of making dramatic statements in dramatic places, like the middle of a battle, so they might be waiting a while longer before he coughed up the words. Instead, he kept a blank face and pulled her around to an out-of-the-way street before attempting to eat her face. "You're amazing, Hinata, you know that," he said, unable to keep from being cheesy and pressing kisses all over her, though he reined it in afterwards and kept it strictly semi-perverted. "I don't think there's anyone quite like you." His tongue moved down her neck and there was that bra strap again. He was starting to get really curious about what the entire thing looked like. She blushed brilliantly and kissed him back, hands moving to go through his hair. "You're more than amazing," she said quietly. "I don't think I could have gotten so far in my training without you, without your acknowledgement." They were having this conversation now. He wanted to make out with her, damn it. "It's all you," he promised. "I think you just needed a push." He moved away, keeping his hands on her waist, and smiled at her. The quiet was a little awkward, but he kept eye contact, watching her blush darken and spread all over her face and down her neck. A bashful grin appeared on her face inadvertently. "Naruto, kiss me again." He gladly complied, the boldness of the statement spurring a much more heated kiss than usual. They made their way back to his apartment quickly after that, neither very enthused about making out outside when their other options included a bed and couch. Once inside, he grabbed her by the hips and pulled her to him from behind, getting a surprised "oh." And then several slightly nervous strokes to his neck and hair. Realizing the pelvic contact was probably what was making her tense, he quickly moved around and kissed her again, this time very nicely, keeping his hands on the small of her back and his tongue in his mouth. Hinata must have realized her hesitation had brought back the gentlemanly kisses and decided she wanted something else because she pulled him over to the couch and soon made it, so he found himself with his lap full of girl. His hand moved down to her hip again, delighting in the feel of skin in between cotton and denim. They'd taken the opportunity of a date to throw their regular clothes into the washer and don some less comfortable and less durable civilian clothing. Despite the slightly restricting jeans, perks included a bra that was pushing Hinata's well developing higher up into his view and a jacket that was much less bulky and easier to slip off of her. He breathed encouragement into her ear as she lowered the zipper of his own sweatshirt and rubbed circles into the base of her spine under her jacket, making her arch up into him. Seeming to feel a little discomfort, Hinata rearranged her limbs quickly so that she was straddling him, mouth coming onto his, then stiffened. It took him a moment to realize that the reason for this would be that she'd just gotten a fairly embarrassing reminder that he was male. The result was a red-faced Hinata attempting to continue the kiss while he tried to contain what seemed to be the biggest laugh of his life. Eventually she excused herself to use the bathroom and he snickered into his fist for the entire 10 minutes she was in there. He guessed the intensity of their lip-locking had been upped quite quickly in a very short span of time, though it was interesting that this was the first experience they'd had with an erection. He'd never had one around her, he realized. He'd been careful about it at other times, but now that they were in the privacy of his home and she'd been straddling him he giggled into his hand again. Gods, the look on her face. She eventually came out of the bathroom, looking a bit more calm, but swaying on her feet a bit when he started chuckling at her nervous expression. Trying to ease the tension, he walked over and gave her a kiss on the cheek. "How about some tea?" "Okay," she almost whispered. He was about to go and get the kettle when he felt her arms wrap around him. "Thank you." He quirked a brow, turning around and returning the hug. "I'm actually sorry. That may have been a little embarrassing. I'll try and keep it under control." "I thank you for everything," she said, words muffled by his shirt. "Stop thanking me," he said with some irritation. "Geez, Hinata, I wouldn't like you if you weren't awesome already. You're cool, strong and you're really pretty." He squeezed her tightly. "Give yourself some more credit, okay? You're my girlfriend, after all." "Okay," she repeated, in the same dazed tone of voice she'd answered his suggestion of tea with. They stood there for a while, hugging. It was nice. It was the night before the Chunin exam and Hinata was enjoying a cup of cocoa that was thick with foam and a massage. Naruto had invited her over for another sleepover, this time consisting of making sure they were prepared for the tests, double and triple checking over their supplies, discussing recent spars and relaxing. His fingers hit a sore spot and she leaned into the pressure, setting down the gutsy ninja and tilting her head back to let him know he had once again discovered a sensitive place on her back. He'd been staying quiet, letting her read and enjoy the hot chocolate. She wasn't entirely sure what he himself was occupying his mind with, and it wasn't too much of an issue at the moment because that felt really nice. His chuckle cut into the silence, and his hands were suddenly away from their place halfway down her back and had taken hold of her shoulders, steadying him as he leaned forward to kiss her neck just below her ear, then returning to their kneading of her muscles. Naruto was a bit of an enigma. Despite her admiration of him, before they'd had that talk in the clearing, she'd always thought of him as goofy. Always playing pranks, being loud and drawing attention to himself. Since his graduation, though, an entirely different side of him had shown up, one that kept her guessing in spite of her close proximity to him. On the one hand, he wasn't very different from the old Naruto, he still cared tons about everyone important to him and about being a ninja, was plenty nice and, as always, had a great love for ramen. The differences, though she could see why they made some people nervous. He was a lot more calculating than he'd been made out to be, and not a bad actor, either. If she hadn't been this intimate with him, she would have been alarmed at the sudden change. This Naruto was also different from the old because he did things like this. He held her hand when they walked down the street and baked instant cinnamon rolls for her if she told him there would be an assessment of her skills at the compound for afterwards and gave great massages the evening before a trying exam. She couldn't see the loudmouth Naruto doing any of these things, and despite her affection for his bold declarations of old, she couldn't get enough of this. Being with him was just so comfortable. Talking and cuddling and sparring. She wouldn't have thought that he'd be the type to spoil his girlfriend, but he was. She wasn't exactly sure how she was supposed to pay him back, but for the moment the new bra and her skill in the kitchen seemed to be enough. She leaned back into him, pulling him down and kissing his neck at a slightly awkward angle, then carefully, so as not to knock the hot chocolate onto his surprisingly neat floor, repositioned herself so she was now in his lap and ready for kissing. Her mouth moved along his jaw, finding his pulse just below and kissing it, then moving down to his collar, her hands moving along his chest, and, she was proud to say, raising goosebumps. She could feel him watching her, maybe just caught up in the moment, maybe doing that thing where he got thinky and distant. Which was a bit frustrating. Here she was, on top of him, and he was spacing out, but it usually only required a kiss to bring him back. Mouth-to-mouth contact did the trick, and quickly his hands were on her, one moving along her thigh, the other keeping up its job of supporting her back with the help of the couch. His mouth was salty, they'd had popcorn, contrasting deliciously with the taste of her drink. It was wonderful, and Naruto, and she wanted more, and he'd certainly always encouraged her taking charge, so she gripped his shirt and pulled him closer, taking hold of his hair gently and pulling him to her. He froze. His eyes moved over her, and she worried that, somehow, she'd gone too far, but then he was kissing back harder, pressing her into the couch, his hands moving on her waist and hip, one leg flung over hers, and it was fantastic. She gripped his shoulders, not even caring that the sound of their lips separating was embarrassingly loud, and panted into his ear, while he reapplied the lava bites on her neck that had been close to healing. She pushed him back into his former position, doing some interesting bending to keep their lips together, while she moved her legs out from under him, then put her legs on either side of him. Her face heated at the definite assurance that he was enjoying this, and she felt the room sway, but she kept her attention focused on his face, how his eyes weren't straying from hers at all. How laughing seemed to be the last thing on his mind, just what was so funny about it, anyway. And she managed to ignore the dizziness and give him a few real kisses before he gently separated them and perched his forehead at the place where her neck met her shoulders and let out a long exhalation. That was wow, he breathed, and she hummed in agreement because it was pretty wow. Granted, nearly everything they did was wow to her, but this, they didn't do any more making out that evening. Instead they cuddled and kissed and eventually dumped the cooled cocoa into the drain, then brushed their teeth and crawled into Naruto's slightly crowded bed to ensure they got their 8 hours before the test tomorrow. Anxiety kept Hinata awake a little longer than Naruto, but the sound of his breathing was a fantastic white noise to lull her to sleep, and she was out soon after. It wouldn't do to be tired for the Chunin examination. Naruto was very surprised by Hinata's decision to forego her bulky jacket in favor of a new, darker and more form-fitting one for the exam, but didn't question or criticize it. The loss of space for stashing weapons wouldn't really be felt, since she'd never used it much in her old jacket due to her being mainly a taijutsu fighter, firstly, and secondly, this new one was better for both camouflage and weaving between obstacles, having less cloth to catch on pokey things. It also gave him the rare pleasure of ogling the curve of her waist, though he tried to keep his eyes on her face, mostly. Team 7 and Team 8 entered the examination building together. He and Kiba had some verbal sparring about the exam, dragging Sasuke and Shino into it to promote that team unity, while Sakura complimented Hinata on her new choice of clothing. It was getting to be a pretty comfortable atmosphere, in fact, until Team 9 showed up. Tension rolled in around the group in waves when Hinata and Neji made eye contact. This was the first time Naruto had ever seen Hinata around her family in this time period, and the fruits of his labors made him pause. Despite the slight differences, Hinata's face was rounder and her lashes longer, Neji's nose was straighter, the two faces were nearly mirror images. On her own, Hinata had mastered the Hyuga's emotionless expression, coolly staring down her cousin in response to his tightly restrained temper. "Greetings, Hinata-sama. Neji Nai-san. It is good to see you. You as well." There was a silence. Even Lee was quiet in the face of this tension. Kiba shifted awkwardly. "You guys are a year ahead of us, right? Neji Hyuga last year's Rookie of the Year," Naruto said, tone light, though his team's careful observation of him tossed out any hope of him seeming friendly. "Yes." Neji replied. "Wow. Then you guys have got a whole year on us in experience. We'll just have to try harder, eh?" he said, smile bright enough to blind, but doing nothing to change the expressions of those around him, though Kiba was looking at him like he really ought to know better than to be a loudmouth in such a tense situation. Maybe it was a bad idea to act the idiot, his team was giving him away, he really needed to talk to them about that, and Hinata wasn't looking any less uptight. He ran his thumb along her wrist, trying to do something to get her face to move the way normal faces did, but only succeeded in making Neji's gaze narrow in on their hand holding like a hawk on a rabbit. "And you are?" he asked, tone giving nothing away, but Naruto knew these genius types, and he knew that since the beginning of the conversation, Neji had been watching not just him, but also the reactions of those around him. Sakura and Sasuke's cautious and watchful responses had right away made him into someone to keep an eye on, and the fact that now Naruto could see the wheels in his head, turning it was evident that where Hinata had been all this time, who it was that she'd been spending time with that had made her into a competent kunoichi, was him, highlighted the dead last even more. Sasuke Uchiha, the next generation's Rookie of the Year, was attentively looking to see what Naruto would do next. He was a wild card. Naruto Uzumaki. "You've probably heard of me," he winked. "No. I can't say I have." Neji turned his attention to another group of genin coming around them. "We should get going. It was good to meet you. You, too. Good luck in the exam." Upon seeing their backs, Naruto let the fake smiles drain out of him. There was conversation between the two rookie teams, but he didn't include himself in it. Hinata had become an honest-to-God Hyuga. Maybe this was a good thing if you can't beat him, join them and all that. The only question was, why? The Hinata he knew, both privately and among peers, well quite different from the girl she'd been 2 months ago, was always pleasant and a little bit shy due to his PTA. But once she'd been put in contact with Neji, and likely every other member of her family, the Hyuga genes seemed to take over. Naruto had to again steel himself and remind himself that this was not necessarily a bad thing. Different from before. Way different. But it was still Hinata. And he loved Hinata. Enough that, should a reaction to an uncomfortable situation be to put on a cool expression and even cooler tone, well, okay. His was essentially the same, though he pasted on a smile and said things to make himself seem simple-minded. Come to think of it, he might have even been a role model in this whole put on a mask thing. Oh, well. Hinata was Hinata. For a little reassurance that this was true, he put his arms around her from behind and leaned his head against hers as he observed the room, mentally nodding when he heard her stutter over a word in her conversation with Ino, whose semi-interested expression from when she'd observed their hand-holding changed into a smug one, in his peripheral vision. Hinata's ears turned red. A silver-haired teenager in glasses walked over, a stack of cards in his hand. Naruto let out a small, bored sigh and plopped his forehead down on Hinata's shoulder, closing his eyes like he'd been up all night studying, and he was so tired and so bored, couldn't this instructor show up already? Less energy meant less conversation with Kabuto, who'd not only see through his mediocre acting skills, but would also immediately place him into the threat category. Sitting next to Hinata had tested his willpower in a really annoying way. He hadn't realized that the habit of keeping contact with her would be so hard to break if she was right there next to him. Holding hands or idly stroking hair just happened, he didn't necessarily make an effort, and the constant nope, can't do that harass popping up every few minutes were really bothersome. But, thankfully, the first test was done with, and now he was calmly holding hands with his girlfriend in front of the forest of death, waiting his turn for a waiver. Here's to a shitty first Chunin exam. Sasuke took the lead here, deciding to find a water source, and hopefully a source of fish, then to wait there and ambush another team. That seemed as reliable a plan as any, though Naruto and Sakura's reluctance to split up meant their speed of searching was reduced, much to the Avengers' annoyance. Soon enough, though, they found a source of water and were swiftly caught up in another team's trap. These were grass genin, not Orochimaru's team, but certainly still strong enough to be cautious around. Thankfully, a Team 7 that worked like a well-oiled machine and wasn't divided into different locations was a force to be reckoned with. They almost immediately had a scroll in their possession, making getting to the tower their next step. If the exam so far was what they could go off of, it wouldn't be as difficult as they thought. If only. Orochimaru was never one of Naruto's favorite opponents, but he'd been expecting some sort of benefit from having come back in time, the benefit of surprise, at least. Kurama was 100% behind him here, and power flowed to Naruto quickly with little nudging on his behalf. Too bad a 5-point seal to the stomach couldn't be overcharged. The sudden absence of Kurama's voice and chakra was worse than any injury he sustained in the battle. It was like putting wool over his ears. He was left with that decent, but certainly not mammoth amount, like he was used to, chakra the Kyuubi had already channeled into him, and his own. His clones were forced to gasp. Take care of themselves by dodging the Snake Sannin's offense. The Snake Sannin was surprised, sure, and very displeased with the gap between what he thought Sasuke's team skill set was and what it actually was, but the gap between himself and their skill was more than enough to keep him ahead. But, Naruto said inwardly afterwards, trying to follow Orochimaru's thought pattern, who knew there was so much talent in Konoha. A herding power-thirsting teen with real talent and an ambition that was overriding his desire to become a ninja stubborn enough that he became predictable and malleable in the end, and his bloodline would be Orochimaru's for the taking. That was already a trait. A Jinchuriki who certainly wasn't a dead last, but had managed to convince the entire village he was until they permitted him to graduate under the belief that he'd never get anywhere as a ninja. Interesting. Interesting enough to possibly waste large amounts of chakra in order to mark him with a seal that whispered clever little suggestions into his ear. And stung like a bitch. Naruto had studied the cursed seal of heaven in his time and had discovered that it had something quite remarkable about it. The newest prototype connected the victim to the one who'd done the marking. Not precisely enough that the Snake Sannin could hear his thoughts directly or communicate with him, but enough to give Orochimaru a distant idea of what kind of person Naruto was. What motivated him. What he wanted most. And just what, Naruto asked himself, was likely to be printed all over his dreams, thoughts and strongest desires. Hinata, Hinata, Hinata. Naruto was not nearly as invested in Konoha as Orochimaru had thought he might be. The feelings of wanting to protect were not broad and complicated, as they might have been with a love for an entire village in his heart, but concise. Easy to understand. And it ultimately would bring the Sannin to one conclusion. There was something Naruto loved more than Konoha. Now, Naruto wouldn't call himself a master manipulator or anything, but he was pretty good. That said, he couldn't really think of a way for Orochimaru to twist the information to his favor. Hinata was a shinobi of Konohagakure, after all, and any plan put into action to get her to switch loyalties would have a million variables in it that could not possibly all be carefully controlled. But just because Naruto couldn't think of it didn't mean that the man who'd gone off and managed to start his own village and gather the loyalty of hundreds of outcasts couldn't find some way. So when Hinata came to him after his sealing, courtesy of Kakashi, he pulled her into his arms and did not let go for several silent minutes. There was absolutely no way Orochimaru was touching a single hair on her head. He wouldn't say a single goddamn word to her. Hinata would stay safe and keep growing as a shinobi in the village of the leaves. No matter what it took. Due to injury and a less honest desire to have free time on his hands to keep up with his observations of Konohagakure and its guests, Naruto Uzumaki wouldn't be participating in the third round of this year's Chunin exams. The Hokage suspected there was something more to Naruto's compliance when asked to put off his promotion till next time, but as it fit with his needs to have as many cursed seal victims on the sidelines as possible, just try asking Sasuke to sit out. If there was one sure way to get him to defect, he didn't probe outright. Jiraiya's presence wasn't yet confirmed in the village, but it ought to be soon, and the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki was due for an examination. Naruto took his place next to Hinata on the sidelines and proceeded to get much closer to her than tolerated in modern civilization, ignoring Kiba's telling him to back off and Shiro's irritated buzzing, as well as Neji and Sasuke's disdain. The back of her neck was getting red and predicting a fainting spell in the near future, but he didn't care. He kept his arms locked around her middle, his chest curved around her back, and his feet firmly on either side of hers, anchoring her as she risked falling over from the highly reduced balance such a position imposed on her. Kabuto was probably taking notes on Sasuke and his teammates, but right now, Naruto didn't really give a shit. Sasuke's fight was the very first, and he was pitted not against the kid from grass whose name Naruto couldn't remember, but against Sakura. The girl shook a little as the pair descended into the arena, but she didn't back down or offer to forfeit. She took a breath. Sasuke. He didn't respond. I know you think I'm beneath you and that I haven't improved at all since the academy. But you're wrong. She said, pulling out several senbon and readying herself. I'm not just the fangirl you guys think I am, she said defiantly, meeting Naruto's eyes and seeming to hold back an eye roll at his draping himself over Hinata. Sasuke mirrored her, both of the Jinchuriki's teammates were staring at him intently. And suddenly, Naruto realized he'd gotten the position of leadership that he'd been seeking in the beginning. Maybe not officially. Maybe they wouldn't even admit it if they were asked. But he was sitting out, and there was a little part of both the Uchiha and Haruno that wondered if participating was quite the right idea when Naruto Uzumaki, who had proven himself to be as capable as a Jounin in combat and in tactics, was cooling his heels on the bench when he'd been one of the bigger reasons they'd even made it this far. Was there something they were missing? And even though the Chunin exams were going to be thoroughly fucked up the ass by Orochimaru's invasion, they were also chock full of that good character developing conflict all on their own, and he was never one to discourage teammates going at it. For a moment, he loosened his hold on his girlfriend and leaned out over the railing, a maniacal grin all his own spreading across his face. Come on, you two. Sakura, kick his butt. Sasuke, give her a haircut. Sakura. Sasuke said, pulling two kunai out of the pouch on his leg, I'm not going to hold back. That was all the acknowledgement the Uchiha would give in front of so many people, but it was good enough for the Pinket. There was a hush. They were about to see the last Uchiha in action. And then they disappeared. Naruto settled his nose in Hinata's hair, trying to ignore the smell of 5 days without a bath and instead focus on the almost faded scent of her shampoo. Hold still, Jiraiya said, ramming his fingers into Naruto's stomach and twisting, dispersing the chakra, keeping the 5-point seal in place. Immediately, Kurama's clawed out, straight from the seal originally on his stomach and burning the sage's fingertips as it spread all over his skin. The fox's growls echoed through Naruto's skull. Desperately, he tried to hush it because this was way too much chakra for a day at the hot springs and, oh god, Jiraiya's attention was not something he needed right now. But too late. SHH, Naruto soothed, and the pain from the stress on his body seemed to recede until the Kyuubi found something it definitely did not like in its examination of Naruto's state of being and proceeded to try and get rid of the cursed seal of heaven the old-fashioned way. Naruto gave out a very unmanly squeak and dropped to the ground, grasping tenderly at his neck where there was literally a battle between two powerful forces going on across 4 inches of skin. The F-Fox. Naruto got out around a jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth. It's getting rid of the snake bastard seal. How? Jiraiya mused, rubbing his chin. The fox's chakra runs through your body constantly. I was using it during the battle, Naruto gasped as the pain receded. When you got rid of whatever Orochimaru did, it kept going, and Kurama could feel his chakra. Huh. Jiraiya said, leaning back and checking out his red fingers. Alright, then. Let's see the cursed seal. According Jiraiya, only a patch of irritated skin and traces of the snake Sanin's chakra, almost unnoticeable among the heavy Biju energy he and that spot on his neck, in particular, exuded remained. The fox's chakra had done its job well, purging the mark off him completely. If only pretty boy had something like this, eh? The toad sage said, smiling jokingly at the sour-faced Uchiha who'd been waiting for the scene to play out in the meantime. Don't even joke, Naruto said, rubbing his neck tenderly, I don't think that angst could be tolerated. Sasuke swallowed a growl and turned expectantly to the Sannin, who still hadn't responded to the duo's earlier question. Alright, you wanna learn something from me? Jiraiya pondered, something cool. Oh. I know water walking. I know it. Sasuke said, irritation bleeding through, I'm asking for an apprenticeship. In sealing. The white-haired man barked out a laugh, do you know what you're saying, boy? That's a lifetime commitment, not something an Avenger can pursue, he finished with a drawl. Naruto reined in an intense bark of annoyance. Apparently, Jiraiya was a lot better than he thought at diverting potential apprentices. He'd never thought he would be, but maybe that was just because the sage had had his eye on him ever since his birth. The man knew just what to say to make the idea of sealing an unappealing one, and it was about the most versatile of the arts, ever. Naruto let out a big, annoyed exhalation of air. Come on, Hiro Sennin, who else could Sasuke go to learn sealing? Cough, the man who'd given him an elaborate hickey, cough. Undo. No more defecting Uchiha, damn it. Look kid, I'm not gonna waste my time with someone who's just gonna learn enough to kill someone and then drop it. Sasuke's irritation lessened somewhat, I don't just quit. I want to learn sealing. You want an apprenticeship with the toad sage? Jiraiya repeated Sasuke's words from before. Sasuke nodded, not looking away from the man's searching gaze. A few moments passed in which Naruto had to try hard not to look as tense as he felt. Sasuke wasn't Jiraiya's usual type. He typically went for the ones looking to change the world. Minato. Himself. Sasuke's personal goal for revenge wasn't something he approved of, either. Naruto felt Jiraiya's eyes on him and clasped his hands together, please. And, when you're not busy, do you think I could sign the toad contract? Jiraiya sighed, fine, he turned to Sasuke, we can give it a shot. Meet me in that. He gestured to the nearest clearing training field tomorrow at noon. I'm not late like your sensei, either, so don't be tardy. Thank you, Jiraiya-sama. Sasuke bowed. Hear that, brat? Jiraiya-sama. That's how you treat your elders, got it? Whatever, Hiro Sennin, Naruto said, puffing his cheeks out in boredom, though the air in them was actually from a big sigh of relief. Sasuke was stuck here. So, can I sign the summoning contract now? After a period of being told off and acting like he was the most hyperactive kid on the planet and being a little bit scared that Jiraiya would spot something off and call him on the whole thing, he eventually got his name onto the Toad contract and summoned a few tadpoles and then Gamakichi, to whom he gave the fried crackers he'd had in his pocket for this very occasion. Once Jiraiya had extracted a promise from both of them, "You, too, blonde brat, you've got a lot to learn about Toad summons, still." To meet him tomorrow, he pretended to leave to take care of some business, said business was probably research, and the two male genin from Team 7 began walking home. Naruto. Thank you. Naruto raised an eyebrow, what are you talking about? You heard me. I know that you did most of the convincing back there. I didn't really want to learn sealing in the first place. Hey, an apprenticeship doesn't mean just learning about the one thing the teacher's a master of, Naruto said, he'll teach you other stuff, too. I know, Sasuke said, and now I'm going to be learning under one of the Sannin. So thank you. And I know you think that if it wasn't Jiraiya, I would have picked another one. Neither of them voiced which one that would have been. But I'm more loyal to Konoha than everyone seems to think. I promise. Naruto smiled genuinely. Glad to hear it. Wouldn't want anyone else at my back. Sasuke went off towards the Uchiha district after that, at which point Naruto realized what just happened. Sasuke promised to stay. Sasuke was staying. He got Sasuke to stay. Hinata. He called, opening his apartment door and not bothering to kick his boots off. Ah. Naruto-kun. She said, turning away from her visitor Neji. Ah, a guest. What a surprise. Naruto said, expression changing from the elation he'd felt at his realization to his somewhat creepy fake joy. Can I help you with anything? Hinata will no longer be living with you. Naruto rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly and pretended to be embarrassed. Well, I wouldn't call it living together. If that's as well as you can act, it's pathetic. I could see through that without the Byakugan, Neji stated coldly. As Hinata-sama has advanced to the next level of the Chunin exams, it is imperative that she receive additional training. Especially since she will doubtlessly bring shame to the main branch at her current skill level. Hinata vs Ino. Not much of a fight there. Hinata vs Neji would be much more interesting. Well, can't she get extra training without us having to move half her things to an entirely different part of Konoha? Naruto said, fake smile disappearing and a somewhat more normal expression taking its place. Neji seemed a little smug at having seen through the ruse. Her living here was only tolerated as it was obvious she would not be heading the Hyuga clan. With each word, Hinata's expression became colder and colder until her glare penetrated. She'd been unsure at his entrance, her slouch was completely gone, but she'd been fidgeting and backing up, but now she was straightening up, dropping her arms and letting them hang at her sides, and seeming to strengthen with the additional support his gaze was providing. Now that some sign of her perhaps being fit to advance has appeared, the Hyuga would like to make sure this miracle does not go unheeded. Now, that's funny. Considering the 2 months that she's spent here have been better for her than any amount of time with you. Naruto said, voice going much lower than he'd expected. But he wasn't about to stop. Can you imagine why Hinata advanced so much? What could she possibly do in such a cold environment? Hinata can feel that is her strong point. Emotion has no place in a shinobi, Neji retorted. Maybe not on the battlefield or even with a client. But in training or studying definitely in interactions with other Konohan emotion has to be there. No matter how much shinobi try to be tools, they're people. Nothing will get done if you go about it with no emotion. He paused. Hinata. Why yes. What do you want to do? She blinked in surprise, then turned to Neji, I know I need training in Gentle Fist and I will accept it. But there's no need for me to start spending all my time at the compound. I can make the journey there and back here with no trouble. Neji looked like he smelled something foul, your father will not be pleased. I'll deal with that. Hinata said firmly, wide eyes meeting Neji's head on. Neji stood there and processed that for a few seconds, then bowed stiffly to both of them and took his leave. Once the door closed behind him, Hinata let out a huge sigh, accepting a tight hug from her boyfriend. You okay? He asked her. I think so, she responded, arms coming around his waist. Good, because that was freaking hot, he said with a grin and stifled her giggles with a kiss. I wonder if you look that cute when you get mad at me. Don't make me mad. She said mock yelling and letting out the same elated laughter Naruto had been enjoying just a few minutes earlier. It was just a good night all around. But it's fun. Naruto protested, and think about the makeup kisses. Hinata giggled and scooted around him, evading his grasping hands and darting to the kitchenette. I found pudding on sale. I thought it would be nice for after dinner. Naruto pouted, it's not gonna be ramen, is it? She shook her head, you can't eat ramen every day. I can try. He insisted, but what's for dinner? Eggplant soup. Kakashi's favorite. He removed his jacket and went to wash his hands, then joined Hinata at the table, accepting her unspoken request to peel and cut the vegetables while she readied the oven. Did you have something to tell me? She asked. He grinned, something good happened. I just wanted to celebrate. She smiled, are you going to tell me what it is? Not even a question. Nope. Hinata didn't protest. She'd been remarkably fine with him keeping certain bits and pieces to himself, though he could tell his silences annoyed or worried her. At his exuberant no, she gave a sigh and pretended to act quite irritated until he pulled her away from covering a pan with cooking spray and gave her a deep kiss. She wrapped one arm around his neck to pull his closer, the fingers on the other one covered in oil. It's a secret, he teased and blew in her ear. She huffed, then grabbed another knife and finished off the tomatoes while he got the onions, and then they placed each halved vegetable, plus garlic, on the pan and waited for the preheating to end. Naruto quickly washed the utensils and set them away to dry, planning on going to look up a few moves that could perhaps supplement the Gyuukin or defend against it for Hinata's fight against Neji. Before he could, Hinata, fingers now free of interfering cooking oil, grasped his face and pulled him in close. She was getting a lot better at starting the kisses. He picked her up by the waist and set her on the counter, hands strictly staying on her hips and waist, though he itched to bring them lower. Her knees were pressing against his sides, and she was getting really good. Her legs were wrapping around him, bringing him closer. God damn it, there was a counter in the way. His table was lower, that would have been a better idea. Hinata seemed to have no idea about his dilemma though, because she was still doing everything infuriatingly right, like tugging gently on his hair and pulling him closer by his shirt and making this really cute sighing noise. Putting her on the counter was a stupid idea, he could have just grabbed her and held her standing up, he bet she would have done the same thing with her legs, and he would have been groping her butt at the same time. He pulled away, I'm a bit uncomfortable, he said, glancing down at the counter edge. Sorry. It's my bad, he said, then backed up so she could slide off and resumed the lip lock. She was the same height as him, thankfully not taller, and this made kissing a lot easier, though he wouldn't mind when he finally hit his growth spurt. They were pressed close now. He got the idea that now it was Hinata suffering the counter edge and switched places with her quickly. He didn't mind it from behind, and he could feel every line of her against him. His hand splayed across her back, feeling the S-curve of her spine and the cushion of her growing hips, and just breathed in the smell of what might have even been perfume as per her growing friendship with the other girls, but was more likely to just be a heady shampoo. The oven beeped. They broke apart, drawing deep breaths, and Hinata quickly pushed the tray into the thing and shut the door, then stilled as he hugged her from behind, grasping his hand when he pressed kisses down her neck. She turned around and returned the favor, drawing circles on his neck with her tongue and running her hands down his front, then locking her arms around his waist and moving her mouth with his, while he tangled his hands in her hair and gripped her to him. It was a personal victory for him when they didn't burn the vegetables. Jiraiya was invested in his summoning, but not as invested as he was in Sasuke's advancement. Kakashi had ceded the Avengers training to the Sannin, and in the meantime concerned himself with Sakura's development in medical jutsu and Naruto's training regime. Naruto and Sakura regularly performed D-ranks together and helped Sasuke by sparring, attempting to heal him, though this one was all Sakura and just spending time as a team. It was unexpected and left a warm fuzzy feeling in Naruto's belly. Apart from being invested in the Toads and Sasuke's advancement in the Chunin exams, Naruto also helped Hinata. Her strikes were veering away from irritating and painful to damn, I really should have dodged that, and woman, I need that arm. Gyuukin still wasn't an area she was gifted in, though, her precision with her senbon was far more terrifying, clearing the training field of his clones faster than they could make a plan of attack. The problem was, of course, that someone with the same ocular advantage Hinata had wouldn't be so unlucky as the kid wearing an orange jumpsuit. As far as that went, endurance training was needed. Naruto had no illusions about the depth of Neji's hatred for the main branch of the Hyuga family, and Hinata especially, now that she was growing a backbone and not afraid to glare Neji down instead of flinching away. He would be brutal in his execution of fate. And then, after every immediate problem, there was Gaara. And Orochimaru. Jiraiya was keeping a close eye on Naruto and looking over the fox's seal and the spot on his neck where Orochimaru had bitten him almost every time they met, and Sasuke every day. Uchiha's will was strong against the snake, his advancement was all his own, the suppression seal was rock solid against the cursed seal's advances. Gaara hadn't been spotted any time Naruto had walked around the city. It prompted the question. Just where did a sociopath spend his free time? He wasn't sure how to handle Gaara's madness, but it had to be handled for him to get close enough to bring him away from the edge. Maybe he could offer a fight, but the chances of himself going berserk and killing his friend weren't close enough to 0% for him to try. He and Kurama had an understanding, but that didn't mean his hormonal 12-year-old body wouldn't give in to the emotions the chakra instigated and black out, or worse. He could attempt to make friends, of course, but Gaara's current philosophy made that a bit difficult. And, anyway, that only worked if he could find the boy. Naruto's paranoia about Kabuto's noticing Hinata was slowly subsiding as the month went by, and no one made any sort of movements. Hinata's Byakugan was especially useful in checking for followers, though he tried not to make it seem like he expected someone to be following them, and the scan always came up spy-free. He was gradually laying off playing bodyguard for her. It was actually a small cause of stress for both of them. When he walked her to the Hyuga compound, she wouldn't abandon him because of the disapproving looks of the Hyuga, and he didn't care, but the abrasive moments when all the pale eyes in the area turned to them, or didn't, but Hyuga he couldn't be sure, weren't helping Hinata raise her reputation. Naruto's eventual goal here was to get her leading the clan, and a bad reputation helped no leader. Hinata's steely stare wasn't much of a crowd pleaser, either, even if it showed that she wasn't about to crumple in on herself like before. The week leading up to the final round of the exams was quite a bit of rushing around. Sasuke's sealing ability had grown as much as could be expected of the Avenger, which is to say, quite a bit. After all, complicated or not, sealing was a discipline, and the Uchiha chewed those up and spat them out without blinking an eye. Sakura's medic nin abilities had expanded to be able to heal small cuts and bruises, for which everyone, but particularly Sasuke, was thankful. Despite Naruto and Hinata's constant training, they both agreed that she ought to support the Team 7 participant first, and so Sasuke had his own personal medic for minor injuries and was able to go harder for longer, which helped when your slow offensive meant having to jump around and take a lot of hits before you could dish out damage yourself. Hinata's growth was truly staggering. A month free of D ranks, courtesy of special treatment for exam participants, had her squeezing as much rest and nutrition as a person was physically able to in with some grueling training. Though he made sure to give her extra attention when they were together, trying even harder to anticipate her moods and prepare accordingly, cinnamon rolls, cuddle sessions, and a time of the month kit packed with Sakura's approving assistance. He also did his best to free up either Sakura's or Ino's time for a girl's day out once in a while to keep them both from going insane with all the lovey-dovey. Sasuke joked about it giving his neck time to recover. Naruto nodded seriously and agreed that was a legitimate reason. And then it was the day. Naruto packed just about everything he had in the house into a scroll, sent out teams of clones to loiter around the city in anticipation of the invasion, and exchanged lots of kisses with Hinata before they left. He was going to need them. Hinata's battle with Neji was the first and therefore had very few spectators. The Konoha 12 were there, of course, along with most of the other participants, but few civilians had come early enough to fully appreciate the Hyuga vs Hyuga match. Not too surprising, since they were both from Konoha and of the same clan, which meant that it might be a bit like watching a ping pong match, each would just retaliate with the same thing, and it would keep going until someone messed up. Naruto was counting on it not being so. The fruits of Hinata's labor meant that Hinata wasn't just better at Jyuukin. Her training with her family had indeed increased her proficiency in the art, sure, but the real magic was in just about everything else. Hinata was faster, hit harder, stayed in the game longer, and was far more clever than her old spars against her family would suggest. Knowing Jyuukin meant that she had a solid defense more than a traditional Hyuga offense. She could block well against another Hyuga's strikes, but essentially her attacks would be modified from other styles. Had the two of them been the same age, Naruto would absolutely bet on Hinata winning the match. As it was, Neji's experience would, unfortunately, put the battle in his favor. After the Hokage's welcome and the proctor's announcements, the two genin made their way into the arena and some scattered applause was heard. Naruto gave a loud whoop and convinced Sakura and Ino to join in, though the blonde was a bit nervous. Something about an encounter with Neji in the Forest of Death. Hinata made the first move, testing the waters with a few senbon which Neji either dodged or deflected with exaggerated ease, not saying anything, but making it obvious through his expression just what he thought of her using weapons instead of the gentle fist. Her throws weren't anything to scoff at, though, and he did get nicked a few times in his advance on her, despite his giving it less notice than a fly landing on him. She let up on the rain of weapons as he came into arm's reach and began instead warding off his hits with kunai, taking advantage of his reluctance to get his hands cut and tagging him a few times in a few inconsequential areas that his defense didn't quite cover. His arms, his legs. Frustrated at not having tagged her vitals himself, Neji risked a cut on his hand to deal a swift blow to her side, one that she definitely felt. Hinata fell back, almost flowing away from her opponent. She kept her distance now, playing it safe, and reached for her stash of senbon, preparing to try and take him down from a distance. To her surprise, Neji snorted. "Did you really think that's all it would take?" The prodigy called, reaching into the folds of his clothes and extracting a vial and sipping at the solution inside. "You knew," Hinata said, facial expression matching her cousin's. She carefully tucked the poison-tipped kunai into her weapons pouch, not discarding them in case he used them against her, too. "I could see traces of the poison on your clothes when you returned to the compound 2 nights ago," Neji said, "even staying away didn't keep your plan secret. But what's to be expected from a failure?" Hinata didn't reply. "Your advances outside Gentle Fist were unprecedented," Neji ceded, "but in the end, you are what you've always been." and always will be. You cannot change your fate, Hinata-sama. But I did, she countered, and I'm going to change yours, too. She took up a stance that Naruto recognized. He frowned. What are you doing, Hinata? He muttered under his breath. That was Gyuukin's stance, for close quarters, exactly the same way she'd always done it, but with a more solid base. That was not going to beat Neji. In fact, it was almost guaranteed it would near get her killed. Neji seemed to think so, too, so we're going to stop this pretending. Why don't you just forfeit right now? Hinata muttered something that even the ninja's lip reading couldn't catch, at least not from the Konoha Genin's vantage point in the stands, but it made Neji absolutely furious. He flew forward, chakra charge strikes hitting hard and with much less finesse than anyone recognized from the teen, but they were effective. Hinata swayed and stumbled a few steps back, looking near fainting. Again she reached into her pack and took out a soldier pill, crushing it between her teeth. The fast-acting upper had her leaping back into the engagement, and now her heightened energy had her deflecting strikes and dishing a few of her own back, hitting Neji twice on the left side and once in the ribs. For her trouble, however, she got 2 strikes to the chest. Naruto knew from experience that just one was enough to have you on your back for 2 days, even from a friendly spar. Neji, on principle, was anything but friendly. Ironically, Neji wasn't as used to taking chakra damage as her, and both took up several seconds of time just keeping the other at a distance and evaluating their injuries. Naruto didn't like to think of his girlfriend as durable, but after a lifetime of getting pounded into the dirt, Hinata was at least more resilient than some other kunoichi he knew. She thought about it for a second, then popped another soldier pill. Neji's face flickered to something like surprise. You'll do serious harm to your chakra coils. If I can't beat you in this, I'm betting I won't need them for much longer, Hinata said. Naruto didn't need the Byakugan to see that her chakra was getting out of control. Combined with the stress on her organs dealt to her by her cousin, the influx of energy suddenly coursing through her body had her jittery and made it difficult to focus. She was more likely to beat Neji with this power, but only because she wouldn't be passing out and only for a few more minutes. She again took out kunai, not poisoned this time, and got in close. I know I can't beat you with just gentle fist. It was difficult to understand Hinata without being up close, her mouth moved strangely with the effects of the drugs. I can't play by the rules anymore because the rules aren't giving me the results that I need. You've predicted it yourself. So you admit. But you don't play by the rules yourself, Neji. Hinata said loudly before he could finish. You're from the branch house, but you've mastered the Kaiten. You don't let predictions hold you back. I refuse to. I refuse to play by the rules. So why not just win? Neji taunted, face twisting, why not just use the seal? I refuse. Hinata said again, face nothing but determined, that seal is a stain upon the family, she said, every inch a Hyuga in demeanor. And it is my goal to have it abolished once I take my place as the next head. The failure cannot change a law that has been in place for generations, Neji said, face blanking in disbelief. Hinata's thoughts concerning the cage bird seal were something anyone could have guessed. Other Hyuga might have said she was too soft or been enraged at her gall, and wasn't that a paradox? But this was one thing that she would never let go. Whether it was her that became head or Hanabi, Hinata's belief on the subject was firm. The cage bird seal had to go. It would be going. And now that gaining the title of head was viable, now that she'd miraculously gained the love of her hero and advanced beyond her peers in skill, when he was the one who told her she could, who was Neji, who'd been wrong about her never advancing since the beginning, to tell her that she couldn't. Naruto had said the opposite, after all. She shook her head, fate can't stop will. I will prove it to you. Her form was shaky and overflowing with energy. Neji's precision would have defended against it easily had he not also taken several hits to important areas. Hinata did not falter. Hinata did not miss. She was Hyuga perfection, jabbing the taken-aback prodigy harshly. Something was wrong. Neji did not shield against her. Thinking fast, trying his hardest to prevent hesitation, Naruto roared, chakra stressing his vocal cords, because if there was one time when it was important for him to be loud, win, Hinata. And she did, striking her cousin decisively in the neck, watching, panting, as he collapsed from whoops poisoning and chakra damage. The Byakugan was all-seeing, maybe, but that didn't mean its users were all-knowing. In the short span in which he'd spotted the poison on Hinata, Neji had no way of telling whether the poison on her clothes was a well-known, fast-acting one made from berries found in Konoha's forests and responsible for a dangerous drowsiness when consumed, likely being adapted to enter directly through the bloodstream from a cut, or something rare, bought in secret a month ago in the land of waves and kept in good condition in a cool, dry cabinet, waiting for its time to shine. This Hinata didn't mess around. Hinata dropped her arms and tried to step backwards, but only succeeded in tripping. But it was okay, because Naruto was there a weird amount of scrolls hanging off of him, and probably not as comfortable as usual, because there was armored mesh under his jumpsuit, but he was there to pick her up, so she didn't even have to worry about standing. There to kiss her eyelids and congratulate her before the cheers even hit, and to stare defiantly back at the row or so of shocked Hyuga observers. He met Hiashi's eyes and kept his face cool, the clan head wasn't getting any emotion from him. Not an ounce. He could get it when Hinata got a long apology and the caged bird seal was wiped off the face of the earth. Until then, Naruto would remain to Hiashi what he was to every adult. Unpredictable. Only here, Naruto was literally holding the man's eldest daughter in his arms and both knew where she'd go if given the choice. Not to mention that the demon container's interference had forcibly pulled her up ahead of the clan's dear prodigy. Hinata murmured a thank you and he laughed into her hair, carrying her after the medics and planting kisses on her hot flesh. "What are you thanking me for, huh? You're the cool one," he said to her, mouth not ever leaving the salt of her skin. She looked like she might disagree, but he silenced her with eager lips and a "don't you dare." Because, yeah, he was proud. His girl won. And he so wanted to take her back to their place, not just his anymore, and not stop showing her how proud until she was passed out, maybe not even then. But the next round, Gaara of the Sand vs Sasuke Uchiha, would bring to them the biggest problem yet. So he made another 2 clones, left them to look after the tired that Crash was already coming on sweaty Eris, and went back out into the stadium to cheer on his duckbit-haired teammate. And maybe hope for some alone time when it was all done. Hinata must have been dreaming. But it was a fantastic dream. On both sides of her there was a Naruto, one holding her to his lap and another sitting on her bed, playing with a kunai. From outside the room, there were shouts. "Naruto-kun. What's going on?" The one with the kunai looked at her, the one holding her pressed kisses onto her neck. She felt her face heat up, she could only imagine what it looked like when your double was kissing your girlfriend. At her blush, however, the Naruto looking at her smirked a bit and she blushed even more, bringing up a cool hand to cover her warm face, and, God, she was tired, her limbs had never felt this heavy. The one behind her laughed a bit through his nose and picked up the pace of his ministrations. She had a feeling his eagerness had to do with her recent victory and felt an even stronger flare of accomplishment in her chest. Naruto was proud of her, of what she'd done. "We're being invaded." That was like a bucket of cold water on her happy mood. Her eyes widened, then why? "You're not recovered enough to fight. We're clones the boss left to make sure you stayed safe. If you'd like, we'll try and help you get to a refugee center, you could help organize the civilians. But you're not fighting." Hinata wasn't sure she could fight even if he hadn't told her not to, but that didn't mean she wasn't going to try. She attempted to get up, aided by the clone she was sitting against, but even the small motion was too much for her. She was completely spent. The Naruto she'd spoken to nodded, "I guess we're staying here, then." She gave a small sigh, "I want to be out there." Naruto smiled a little, "That's why we love you." She stilled and met his kind face with wide eyes. He seemed to realize what he'd said and fumbled a bit, I mean, if that's okay I don't mean you have to love me back or anything." She didn't have enough strength to go over to him and silence him with a kiss, but she could turn and give the clone holding her exactly the kind of kiss she wanted to give the original right now. She would have thought she'd be crying at a moment like this, but maybe she was too tired or maybe something else, but either way, both Narutos looked relieved there wasn't water leaking from her eyes. "I love you, too," she said elatedly, winding her fingers in his blonde hair and touching her mouth to his again, eagerly accepting his tongue when it ventured out to meet hers and arching into him when his arms came around to hold her to him tighter. "I love you," she repeated, and he echoed her, "I love you," and it was just the most amazing sound, ever. The other Naruto couldn't keep away, it seemed, and he grasped her to him from behind, planting kisses on her cheek, her shoulder, her neck, in her hair, and breathed her name into her ear. The situation was weird, but she didn't care, meeting the mouth of the Naruto in front of her eagerly, their tongues touching curiously, a little like that first time in his room. She couldn't stop her intake of breath when 4 hands gripped her middle and 2 sets of lips, teeth, 2 tongues made their mark on her neck and collar. The shouts from outside weren't going away, and it wasn't the time for this, but it felt so good to hear and feel and taste Naruto, right here, now, with her. He wasn't far away, he was here, hers, and he'd said so himself. He loved her. And then the door opened, and a silver-haired genin she recognized from the Chunin exams walked in, adjusting his glasses when he saw the 3 of them. "My, Naruto-kun. You don't waste any time, do you?" She turned a bright red, ducking her face to hide behind her bangs. There was an invasion going on and she was sitting here, kissing her boyfriend. She was sitting here kissing too. Naruto's reaction was completely unexpected. "What do you want?" He barked angrily, looking as close as a clone could get to calling on the Kyuubi's chakra. The genin shrugged, "Nothing of consequence." "Your allegiance to Orochimaru-sama." "No fucking way." "I figured." Which was why I came here for her, the genin nodded at Hinata. It's quite sloppy of you to leave your most important thing unattended by anything except clones. One might question you having any feelings for her at all. But I guess we'll see. The genin withdrew 2 scalpels, which glinted maliciously in the white light. Hinata all of a sudden felt a lot more tired than she was a second ago. Motherf. Sasuke didn't get to finish his curse because a giant sandy hand whipped out and slammed him against Naruto, who was extremely irked to find himself the cushion for a not at all delicate 12-year-old boy and happily finished his swear for him. What do we do? Sasuke asked him. Naruto licked his lips, observing the raccoon's agitated motions. The Ichibi was still adjusting. They could use that. His gaze then narrowed on the sleeping genin being held against the raccoon's head by sentient sand. We have to wake him up, Naruto said. And how difficult is that gonna be? The tanuki let out a deafening roar, the reed did not stir. Sasuke didn't need an answer. Can you hold him in place? Naruto asked the apprentice sealmaster. Sasuke paused as well as one could pause when one was dodging flying trees and sand and considered, pulling a perfect sealing brush and ink tablet out of another pouch he'd attached to his waist. The rest of Team 7 gleefully called it a fanny pack when Sasuke wasn't around to spit literal fire at them. Naruto grit his teeth against the slowness of the analysis. He was 6 or so years ahead of the other ninja and as such had 3 restraining designs capable of sealing a tailed beast on hand automatically. This battle had ended without the use of Sasuke's killer sealing jutsu last time, though, and this time around, there was actually going to be some teamwork involved. Sasuke needed to use his newly acquired discipline in a battle, and Naruto suddenly pulling the brush out of his hand and whipping out a big-ass seal design with the help of 3 or so clones would not only insult his teammate by insinuating that he wasn't of any help, but would also lead to the question of just where in the hell did Naruto learn how to whip out a restraining seal. In addition, as important as this fight was to Gaara, Naruto, and the rest, the battle was relatively mild compared to the ones Naruto had been through before, and it would be easy to intervene using Kurama's power if the skirmish somehow grew out of hand. Distract him, Sasuke yelled, and try to keep him in the same area. He sliced a kunai neatly over the flesh under his thumb and deposited the blood into his tablet, frantically stirring the ink at the same time as attempting to still the flow and accidentally spilling a few precious droplets over the edge. The crease in performance due to blood loss wasn't something Naruto had ever suffered from due to how his metabolism apparently had him replenishing his blood supply several times faster than any human, but he imagined it just added another stressor to the 12-year-old. The amount of blood his body held couldn't be enough to keep supplying him with a base for the mixture through a battle if this didn't work right away. Naruto did as instructed, a squad of clones poofing into existence and charged the sand monster, the Nine Tails chakra, quickly coming to his limbs and aiding in his taking of large chunks of the Ichibi off. He reformed, but not fast enough to move from his spot under the pressure of 9 or so Naruto Uzumaki, and to the great annoyance of anyone who'd ever challenged him to a battle of wills, Naruto's stamina meant he could keep it up into the week. Meanwhile, Sasuke moved between the still standing trees and carefully painted down markers that Naruto knew would communicate with each other and worked to keep the chakra used inside the seal, just as soon as Sasuke painted its main part into the outside. Sasuke finished with his perimeter and jumped out just a little to the side of one of the trees and, with another slice to his opposite hand this time, quickly had a seal for restraining someone mapped out. Regretfully, the amplifier he'd used was not going to be enough to hold back a tailed beast with his chakra. But here, Naruto could help. Abandoning his clones, the Jinchuriki jumped to the side of his teammate. What's up? I don't have enough chakra. Sasuke watched the continued thrashing of the monster, pale and visibly upset at the realization that he was now short on blood and chakra and nowhere nearer to accomplishing the set task. Naruto snickered, drawing the heir's attention to him. A glance was exchanged between the two where Sasuke realized just what the blonde's grin meant. He stepped away and Naruto thrust 2 chakra-charged hands down onto the seal, a third of his chakra disappearing in the effort to still the now very enraged chakra beast. The Ichibi struggled against the confinement, but it would hold. Jiraiya's sealing techniques were nothing to scoff at, and neither was Sasuke's mastery of anything he'd attempted to learn. Now what? Now Naruto began, but froze. Hinata. One clone was down, the other was chasing after a speedily retreating Kabuto who was missing an arm plus drugged and unconscious Hyuga heiress. When the hell did this go downhill so fast? Naruto had to finish this quickly, and that meant no more time for Sasuke to participate. He shifted to all fours and urged Kurama to give him as much chakra as he could take, and suddenly, there wasn't a human besides Sasuke anymore. He was barely humanoid. The conclusion was reached quickly, with a terrifying amount of chakra, perhaps overkill but he didn't care, being fired at the Ichibi and blasting Gaara away from the sand, jarring the connection between Ichibi and host enough that the boy was soon blinking sleepily and with much alarm at the blonde who was absolutely pouring out malicious chakra. You're like me, Gaara said, puzzlement coloring his expression. Naruto knew that Gaara had seen him around his friends and likely assumed he was like every other ninja. But now, your philosophy is screwed up, Naruto said, knowing time was ticking away, but his clone wasn't gone yet and he needed to say this, otherwise some messed up shit could occur. Sasuke was getting better at the whole needing others thing, but leaving two emotionally stunted teens together had never resulted in anything good. Loving only yourself, working towards a goal that benefits only you? Don't make me laugh. That's not worth a thing. That's less than nothing. He watched Sasuke run towards them and made quick work of powering down the Kyuubi's chakra. You work for your friends, your family. Damari and Kankuro in the distance, hurrying towards them with alarm on their faces. Their dangerous murderous little brother was under an enemy shinobi's kunai. Sasuke's appearance meant another few movements of the brush had Gaara unable to move and Naruto left a clone with a quad so he could get the hell out of there. Orochimaru's hideaway was more than a little far from Konoha. Naruto's muscles burned not only from the fox's chakra but from running so hard for such a long distance. And then he'd have to fight when he got there. His clone had successfully avoided being popped in his pursuit of Kabuto in order to see where the spy was going, though the gray-haired traitor wasn't trying very hard. Naruto needed to know where Orochimaru was, after all. Once they'd arrived at the waiting spot, though, the copy was quickly disposed of and Naruto moved that much faster. He didn't trust Kabuto near anyone with fewer weapons than a butter knife. Him near Hinata with his full supply of all his favorite drugs, jutsu and his goddamn scalpels wasn't even a little okay. Soon enough, he arrived at their location, wind chakra gathering for a Rasengan. He hadn't used one yet since he'd traveled back in time, but the bastard was asking for it. Kabuto didn't get 2 words out before he had to lift the unconscious Hinata by the jacket and hold her in front of him like a target. A puff of smoke and a clone appeared. Put her down and get away from her. So you can attack me without worries. Kabuto wasn't as pleasant as usual, maybe because he was missing an arm. Come now, don't disappoint us. Orochimaru-sama has high hopes for a second prodigy in Konoha. I hear your abilities were even better hidden than mine. A scalpel came out from between the fingers holding the scruff of Hinata's jacket. Fuck off. Give me Hinata. All you care about is her, I must say, I'm impressed. How did you manage to fool the village? Or, are you actually? Kabuto's eyes lowered to rest on Naruto's stomach, where the seal was getting hotter. Kurama was restless. I'm not the Kyuubi. We just work towards a common goal. Why was he telling this to the Snake Sanin's underling? What goal is that? Naruto scowled. Well, part of it is keeping Hinata safe. Another puff of smoke, Naruto's clone replaced himself with Hinata and punched the bespectacled ninja in the face. Kabuto took 2 steps back, then ended the clone's life with a carefree swing of his knife. His jaw was tight and his face pale. Even if he'd stopped the blood flow of his arm, he was in a lot of pain and probably more pissed than was comprehensible that he had to try and convince the little shit who'd ripped his arm off to join him. Naruto imagined Kabuto was looking forward to getting a definite no and returning the favor. And the rest? Wouldn't you like to know? Naruto said, barely paying attention, arms full of Hinata. Another clone appeared and this one was past the girl. The double immediately ran off to some out-of-the-way part of the forest. You won't be able to keep her safe in Konoha, Kabuto said. Orochimaru invaded Konoha for the Sharingan. And, sorry, that's not gonna happen, but I'm thinking it'll be a while before you make another attempt. However, Naruto blinked as a thought appeared. He shouldn't be so worried about Sasuke right now. Kabuto's expression was unreadable. Why is that? Sasuke's Sharingan won't be where Orochimaru needs it for transplantation for some time now. In that time, a mutual enemy of ours will be on the move. Kabuto remained silent. Akatsuki. Naruto waited for a response, but was disappointed. I don't have a problem with Orochimaru as long as he stays away from Konoha and Sasuke. He won't need him for a while, anyway. But Akatsuki's real leader wants something I know Orochimaru wouldn't be behind. Naruto made another clone. I'm willing to work together with him on this, but Konoha and Hinata have to both stay safe. Kabuto didn't put away his scalpel. You think we'd give you information on us while you're still a part of Konoha? He laughed. You're not as smart as I thought you were. Huh. Kabuto knew one-hand seals. Neat. Naruto dodged like crazy, but it didn't prevent 2 bad bites from what he was sure were poisonous. Well, of course, would Orochimaru use anything else? Snakes. Kyuubi couldn't help much with that, except to burn away all traces of the poison, which meant Naruto was using his own chakra to damage himself, and that was never a good sign. He didn't land any more hits on Kabuto, who'd learned to keep his distance. Then again, this wasn't an issue if you knew how to handle it. More clones, charging, dodging, raising the landscape with sharp wind chakra, brawling with the snakes, and in the meantime, Naruto pulled out his own ink tablet, much less fancy than Sasuke's, unfortunately, and went about making the battleground into a minefield. The Sanin's accomplice was too busy with the clones to notice. The fight was possibly one of the most effortless, if you didn't count the getting there, the clones, the chakra depletion from Gaara, the poisonings, and the panic when he realized he had to charge the seal, then get the hell away before he became barbeced. He'd been in since he came back, but he was exhausted. Worse, when he finally found his clone, Hinata was still too gone to respond, and the doppelganger looked about ready to burst. It wouldn't surprise him if the copy was sustained only on sheer will by now. But it was over. Gaara was stopped, Kabuto was stopped, he hoped permanently, but you could never be sure with the traitor, and all that was left was to take Hinata and get back to the village. Except he was so tired. Kyuubi withdrew the energy racing through his veins into a warm bowl in his stomach that, too, was fading. Sleep, it purred, I can be alert. But he still didn't quite trust the fox, and it wasn't a good idea to fall asleep by a battlefield almost certainly dead opponent or not, so he picked up Hinata. She was usually fairly simple to lift, but his arms were like jelly, slung her over his shoulder and began trekking back. Half a mile in, he forgot how to say his name. 3/4, and he was out. When he woke up, Jiraiya was standing over him looking grim. Naruto sent a loopy smile his way. How's Hinata? Fine, the Sannin replied, but whether you see her depends on your answers to a few important questions. Naruto sighed, what's up? How long have you known about the Kyuubi? Since I was little, Naruto responded crossly, I don't remember when, I just remember blacking out one time and waking up in a sewer. A sewer? It's the seal where the fox is sealed. Behind this big cage. And how long have you kept in contact with it? Naruto scowled, I haven't. It just gave me power during the fight today. Didn't want to get captured any more than I did. That's interesting, Jiraiya said, because just a few weeks ago, you called the fox by a name. Really cute. Kurama, was it? Naruto blinked. Had he? He couldn't remember. This could be a problem. His scowl didn't let up, why does it matter? It matters because you seem to know what you're doing, and I need to make sure that you do, before anything else happens, Jiraiya said. Naruto blanked, what's gonna happen? The Hokage's battle couldn't have ended any differently. The clones hadn't reported any change, despite their attempt to interfere. Hinata had been his primary concern. The Hokage is dead. Naruto felt the lump in his throat expand to stop his breathing. Sure, he was here for Hinata. To help her, to keep her safe. But he was also here to change things. He thought he'd been on the right track, with Sasuke's change and Sakura's improvements, and surely his added experience could have turned the tide of the battle, but no. That was too easy, apparently. He could beat a weaker, younger Kabuto, could convince a bitter demon fox to enter an agreement with him, and a revenge-obsessed preteen to remain loyal to a village he, unknowingly, has good reason to detest, but Orochimaru's barrier ninjutsu was still impossible for him to overcome. He was still nowhere near the level of the Sannin. Not anywhere close to Hokage. I saw, he said, voice hollow, the clones I can see what they see. It's part of the technique. Jiraiya continued, you left the village. Naruto let his face change to rage, it wasn't hard. Kabuto was a traitor, he kidnapped Hinata, trying to convince me to join up with the snake bastard. But you got her back and managed to eradicate a threat to Konoha to boot. The white-haired man stroked his chin thoughtfully, using the Kyuubi's power. Naruto sighed, Kurama doesn't hate Konoha. Well, he hates the Uchiha, but there's only one of them in Konoha, and he's 12. What did you agree to gain access to its power? Naruto paused. Weighed the consequences. Then spoke, I'm going to kill the leader of Akatsuki. Explain to me again why there are 4 people out looking for one person when one of them's a Sannin and certainly able to handle this sort of mission on his own. Sasuke asked, absent-mindedly finishing a storage seal on his arm and depositing 2 kunai into it, then moving a wrist guard to cover the ink. You're Jiraiya's apprentice, so you're definitely coming with him, Naruto listed, and Hinata's too injured to help repair the village, but not so much that she can't come with us, and the Hyuga needs some time to come to terms with Hinata's badassery, and I want her to come. Okay, Sasuke ceded, but that still leaves you. Naruto shrugged, Jiraiya asked me to. I think it's exciting, Hinata said, Tsunade-sama is a big deal for Kunoichi. Naruto grimaced, I wouldn't expect too much. She hasn't stepped foot in the village for, what, 10 years? I'm thinking she's not gonna be too enthused about coming back, even for the Hokage position. Sasuke gasped, what? Even for the Hokage position? Naruto snickered, shut up. Hinata giggled, but it is strange that we have such a large group, enough to make a genin team. The important thing is, Naruto began seriously, then slung his arms over both of them and pulled them in close, we're safe, we're together, and we're on a glorified vacation from cleaning duty. Hey, don't get so comfortable, brat, Jiraiya said, leaning over the 3 of them, but not helping Sasuke in his attempt to get away. This is a training trip for you, too. Even the lady's gonna be putting her tracking skills to use. Hinata puffed her bangs out of her eyes, but seemed fine with it, like she was expecting some sort of a catch. Alright, then, Naruto said, let's get training. Not yet, Jiraiya said, we should probably at least start on what we're being paid to do, first. Taking advantage of the fact that no one had yet noticed they'd crested the hill, Jiraiya gave a dramatic sweep of his arm over the view. Even Sasuke was able to appreciate the sight of the festival. Below them, the town bustled. Stalls were selling sweet swelling barbec, small toys and masks, and beautiful cloth that everyone was careful to give a wide berth, lest they spill something or kick up dust onto the expensive fabric. Children lined up at games of all sorts and adults could be seen stumbling down the street with spots of color on their cheeks, even at this hour of the day. It was the only festival Naruto had ever been to. He'd never really been a fan of Konoha's commemoration for the Kyuubi attack, and he had some pretty good memories about this place. "You boys can take a walk," Jiraiya said. "Hinata, you're coming with me." Naruto gaped. Last time he was here, Jiraiya had ended up in something he'd been sure was a brothel. "Hold on, what are you?" "Relax, kid," Jiraiya grinned, information gathering. "Your girlfriend's a tracker, this'll be right up her alley." Naruto scowled, "I'd better not find her in some alley." "Hinata. Don't let him do anything perverted," he shouted. "People are staring, idiot," Sasuke muttered, grabbing him by the back of his jacket. "Let's go." No response from the others, apart from a small wave from Hinata. "Oi. You hear me, whack?" "Ow, Sasuke, what was that for?" "For being a moron." 4 hours in, however, and the Uchiha's attitude was changing, too. Naruto's constant whining might have had something to do with it. "Look," the black-haired boy stopped to pick a rock out of his sandal, "it's about time to go looking for them. You can keep bitching, or you can come with me." "I'm not bitching." The blonde protested, "You wait till you and Sakura start dating. I'm gonna take her out to ramen all the time, you'll see what it's like." Sasuke snorted, then took off in the direction of most of the bars. Getting the idea, Naruto followed. Soon enough, a loud laugh had them narrowing their focus on a particular stall, and upon entrance, they discovered a babbling and blushing seal master under the care of 2 busty young women. "No, Hinata." The Uzumaki watched as a vein on Sasuke's neck grew 3 sizes. "What was that about them gathering information?" he asked sweetly. The 2 girls barely had time to jump out of the way before a table flew at the drunk, and what must have been several score bills worth of alcohol spilled everywhere. "Annoying, irresponsible old drunk, I stand up for you, and this is what I get." Sasuke muttered under his breath, "Get up. We're leaving." Naruto had difficulty keeping his giggles down. Then Naruto. At this point, some skeezy guy in a boring suit began making a fuss about a stain, but Naruto didn't care because Hinata, 12-year-old Hinata, he reminded himself, still a genin Hinata was in front of him wearing something he wouldn't ever have seen her in. He had underestimated her bust size. Or maybe it was padding, he didn't care, whatever the means, her were pushed up to almost eye level, and he had no willpower whatsoever to restrain his gaze. In addition, her dress was of the same cut as the ones the other girls were wearing, and he swore he'd never seen that much leg in his life. Damn, he'd been staring for a while, holy fuck, no blood flow there. Stop at all costs. He almost ripped his jacket in his attempt to get it around her shoulders, but it happened, and then he was away from her and with Sasuke and Jiraiya, standing over a bruised businessman who kept insisting his greasy suit was worth 100,000. "You catch that, kid?" Jiraiya asked him with a grin, "or were you too busy staring at your girlfriend's rack?" Naruto was dangerously close to Rasenganing his own face. "It was for training." Jiraiya repeated through a swollen lip, "What are you complaining for, anyway, brat? Or are you upset I saw them first?" Kyuubi was thoroughly enjoying this and charged Naruto with chakra without any sort of provocation, so that his glare at the toad sage was red and his teeth twice the size they should be. Jiraiya was not amused and whacked him on the back of the head, while Hinata, face redder than anyone had thought possible, fussed over his other side and said things like, "I'm sorry. It's embarrassing. Just please don't mention it." Which, of course, made the situation even worse. The Sannin's ability to make everyone hate him was the stuff of legend. It had been less than a day, and he'd already gained the ire of the last Uchiha, the 9-tailed demon foxes Jinchuriki and the Hyuga heiress. As a statement of his vexation, Naruto refused to let Hinata get between himself and Jiraiya and kept her firmly on his left side, her hand in his, and shot frequent glares at the sage. Yeah, he'd missed him, but this was damn irritating. Sasuke was up ahead of the group, hands in his pockets, hunched over and likely recontemplating his decision to stay in Konoha, where the legendary ninja were all perverts or deserters themselves. "Look, it was amusing for a while, but you've gotta start talking to me again," Jiraiya said, exasperated. "There's that technique I've gotta teach you. The Rasengan." Naruto gave a cool expression, "Is that what it's called? I just didn't have a name for it." He paused and held his palm out face up, concentrated, and called forth a sphere of rapidly circling wind. Jiraiya's face would have been priceless had it not been scary as hell. "Where did you learn that?" he questioned. "What do you mean, where?" Naruto said, dissipating the chakra and falling in step with Hinata again, who was watching him curiously. "Once I learned about chakra affinity, I thought I should do something with it. Your affinity is wind." Sasuke dropped back to walk with them once training had started. Naruto shrugged, still irked, and pressed closer to Hinata, who ran a thumb over his knuckles reassuringly. The white-haired toad summoner shook his head. Every time you come into the picture, kid. Naruto was surprised to find himself smirking and gave the man Kushina's trademark grin, #1 unpredictable ninja. The sage snorted and walked ahead. Come on, Ichiha. Some people just can't wait patiently to learn new things, so I guess you and I will just have to catch up. Naruto suspected the distance was also for privacy between himself and Hinata, perhaps a slight apology and acknowledgement that maybe he wasn't such a brat and made good use of it, pressing a kiss below her ear and watching her blush grow, slightly. Are you okay? She near whispered. Me? What about you? He squeezed her hand again. I can punch that pervert again, if you want. She shook her head. It really was just a tracking exercise. I had to fit in with the other girls. Opportunity? You were much prettier. She ducked her head and he snuck another kiss in under her bangs. This next town, let's go on a date. It's famous for its casinos, but I think we could find a nice bakery or something. It would be cool to see if the cinnamon rolls from around here taste. And Raymond, she added, bumping his hip with hers. Naruto's eyes lit up. I love you. She giggled. I love you, too. Oh, came Jiraiya's voice, obnoxiously nasal, and Naruto released her hand to chase after him. Jiraiya's eerily accurate description of Tsunade right down to her measurements meant that finding her was child's play for the group's tracker. Hinata had them face to face with the woman within half an hour, and Jiraiya's smooth talking got the group ushered into a booth where, to his slight exasperation, Naruto was sitting directly across from the slug Sannin. Tsunade hid her emotions at his appearance well, but he could still see the way her gaze lingered over him, the son of the fourth Hokage and the bloody habanero. He gave her a big grin. Come on, Granny, why don't you come back with us? You can keep the hat warm for me. Her face immediately wrinkled in irritation. Brat, you don't know a damn thing about that village. It'll destroy you. Naruto scrunched his face in distaste. Jiraiya and Sasuke's attention peaked. He was acting like a brat, and that usually meant something interesting was about to happen. Man, what are you acting so stuck up for? Konoha's a nice place. Nice place, my ass, Naruto thought, still the same prejudice everywhere, won't let me walk into a shop unless someone of high standing's there to glare them into submission. But Tsunade didn't need to know that. Yet. You're the one who doesn't know what he's talking about, Tsunade said, anger rising. Konoha took my brother away from me. My gramps died in service for Konoha, too, Naruto said, whining. That doesn't mean it's the village's fault. This was almost getting annoying. He didn't know how long he could keep up that whine. The Hokage was a fool, Tsunade said bitterly, and so is anyone who chooses to stay in that village. Thump. Hinata's fist came down on the table. Sasuke and Jiraiya looked like they might have said something, too, but their expressions morphed into stunned surprise at the look on Hinata's face. Stony. Hyuga. Don't you dare say that, Hinata said, voice firm. Don't you dare call Naruto a fool for choosing to give his life to Konoha. Tsunade blanked. He's given more to Konoha than anyone should have had to. The emphasis was strong. Tsunade's intake of breath meant that she understood exactly what Naruto's childhood had been like and, maybe more privately, that she ought to have been there, if only because no child should endure being alone. Sasuke's lost his entire family. They gave their lives to Konoha as well. They're not fools. I don't know what Jiraiya-sama's been through, but I can bet that he's felt loss because of his duty as well. Don't call us fools. Jiraiya cleared his throat. You know, the kid, he nodded to Naruto, has a point. And he's not unimpressive on his own. I was trying to teach him the Rasengan earlier. Tsunade snorted. A brat like that, learn the fourth's technique. Well, if he's just a fool, I don't think it'd be too hard, Naruto said, crossing his arms. If I do, you'll come back to the village. Tsunade gave him a considering glance, then shook her head. No. This isn't something to bet on. I'm not going back to that village. It's destroyed everything to me. Nice try, kid. Jiraiya said out of the corner of his mouth. When everything's destroyed, you have to start building again, Sasuke said, surprising the blonde genin. The Avenger's eyes were darker than usual as he stared at the woman. It's the only way to get anything done. You want to get something done? Tsunade said, don't give your life to an ungrateful bunch of idiots. She turned to Naruto. Look, kid, I'm sorry about what I said. It's fine to have a dream. But I don't anymore. And I'm not sure how you do, either. If you ever need a place to go outside the village, I can help you out. She left. Shizune, who'd been silent until now, jumped in front of Jiraiya. Don't leave just yet, please, she said, I'll talk to her. Jiraiya sighed. I don't think she'll change her mind after something like that. This means that she'll be put down as a missing nin for failing to report to duty when called. The medic nin nodded. I know. Just give her some time. A week. I'm sure she'll change her mind by then. Jiraiya shrugged. It's no problem. I can wait a week. It's a training trip for the kids, too. But if she doesn't change her mind, Naruto fisted his hands. A lot of what he'd done under Tsunade. He wasn't sure how his plan would play out under the rule of someone chosen by the council, and he didn't want to find out, either. If Tsunade didn't take up the mantle of Hokage, his next best option would be Jiraiya, and that wasn't happening. He couldn't convince her by mastering the Rasengan, so how could he change her mind? Hinata was remarkably annoyed with Tsunade, her hand was vice-like on his during their date, and she didn't move further than 2 feet away from him at any given time, which would have been fine if they were in any position to step into a closet for 7 minutes in heaven or something, but the whole mood was wrong. With her being peeved at the Hokage candidate and him anxiously grinding his teeth over the issue, the date was mostly awkward silences and small talk. Neither wanted it to devolve into a trash-talking fest. There were a few kisses, but they were absent-minded and unenjoyable. After a dinner of ramen and a short walk, they called it a night. The next morning brought the reminder that at some point on this trip, he was to encounter Itachi Uchiha and kiss him Hoshigaki. Actually, Naruto could remember it being before they'd hit this town, but then, they'd covered the distance much faster than before, with Hinata's tracking and Sasuke's on-the-go training. The day was hotter than he would have liked, the sun shining down on the town and making everyone blink dazedly whenever they stepped outside. Spotting 2 figures in black cloaks from a vantage point in this heat was child's play, no one else was wearing anything so stuffy. From then, all he had to do was wait. Jiraiya had gone off to try talking to Tsunade without the kids, so Sasuke and Hinata unrolled some scrolls and got to studying, while Naruto leaned back and acted like he wasn't about to have a panic attack. When the knock on the door came, he jumped up to answer it. "Naruto Uzumaki. We would like you to come with us." He didn't so much see as he felt Sasuke stiffen in the room. An Avenger would have a difficult time forgetting the voice of his target. Hinata looked up with curiosity. Damn it, what did he say in this situation? This brat's the 9 tails. Kisame drawled lazily from behind the Uchiha. "Brother." Sasuke snarled, so close to Naruto that he almost jumped out of his skin. The bandages on the dark boy's hands fell away and glowing seals. They looked like storage seals, but not quite. He could see the character for lightning somewhere on there appeared, the ink so luminous that it was almost floating off of his skin. More chakra than Naruto thought Sasuke had erupted around him, and he dodged to avoid getting fried, but so did Itachi. Hoshigaki ended up receiving the blow head-on and was blown back, electricity dancing around his body. Naruto twisted around and saw Itachi bending over Sasuke, grabbing hold of his arm and using a move so elementary no one would have expected it to sprain his wrist, then tossing him away. At this point, Hinata popped up on Naruto's left side, just in time to dance around Samehada and hit Kisame on the arm, but the usually disabling hit did nothing, and the shark man batted her away without blinking. Good. Better she wasn't anywhere near the craziness. Naruto called on Kurama's power, but kept the chakra to himself, avoiding the shark skin like the plague. The sword would suck him dry if he allowed it, and that was just not what he needed today. 3-4 clones, and each jumped the missing nin, but were popped as soon as they neared his vicinity. Straight up combat it was. Naruto drew out 2 kunai and jumped onto the blue-skinned ninja, proceeding to make himself the biggest annoyance he could, jumping off his sword, kicking him in the face, dodging every attempt to quarter him he could, but not getting caught. Itachi moved in to help but found his way blocked by a certain white-haired sage. Naruto couldn't hear the conversation that occurred and he didn't care any second now, his last clone seal would activate and he could get over there himself. Any second after what seemed like an eternity, Kisame roared in anger when inky tendrils from his own shadow pulled him down and bound him in a hear no evil, see no evil seal, unable to do more than roar in anger and wait. Samehada was picked up carefully, Fox's chakra flowing into it despite the blonde's best attempts to retain it, and set aside, another quick seal blocking the sword access to its owner. "Impressive that you managed to subdue my partner," Itachi said to him around Jiraiya, who was, evidently, attempting to figure out their purpose. Sasuke had made another attempt to attack his sibling and been given a face full of wool for his trouble. He lay crumpled up to the side, but Naruto knew, likely just knocked out and nothing more serious. Jiraiya muttered something under his breath, not looking away from the ex-Anbu. Which was fine. Kisame out, Sasuke out, Hinata probably out, coast was clear for Naruto to spill the beans. "You were ordered to kill the Uchiha clan." By Danzo. Jiraiya blinked. Itachi blinked. "How did you find out?" You know the Rasengan, you know sealing, and now you know a secret about the village that I didn't know before you just said it," Jiraiya said, putting a heavy hand on Naruto's shoulder, fingers digging into him. "Who are you?" And, well, Naruto had always been a fan of pranks. "I'm the son of the Yondaime Hokage Konoha's #1 unpredictable ninja." "So all this time, you knew?" Jiraiya roared, throwing his hands up in the air. "About everything. Could you not yell?" Naruto spat, tucking a blanket in around Hinata. There was a lump on her forehead the size of Jupiter, and he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. He didn't even know if he should be waking her up. "What is your plan of action?" Itachi asked. He was enjoying a rare moment of peace, sitting at his brother's bedside and observing as Naruto fussed over his girlfriend. The genin had left the fussing over Sasuke to his older brother. Itachi fussed surprisingly well. I needed Tsunade to become Hokage. Under her, I could have taken a mission to go after Akatsuki and put an end to this in aim before it went too far over there. Then I'd warn the other Jinchuriki about Madara's plan. Madara Uchiha? Jiraiya asked. Yeah. The Madara Uchiha that was supposed to have died in an epic battle over 100 years ago. Yeah. Just checking. Naruto sighed. Anyway, without her as my leader, no one will legally let me take that mission. What makes you think she would have given it to you? I would have fessed up. She knew my parents a bit, she'd probably be convinced if I showed her what I could do. But if she didn't I'd have to go missing Nin. Jiraiya's face darkened. No. It's the only way. Naruto said, raising his arms in defense, you have no idea how fucked up everything is about to get. Itachi, tell him. The Uchiha watched him cautiously, everything you've told us makes sense, though I can't understand how you found out about it. Naruto pouted, big, furry thing. Lives in my stomach. Smart enough to put 2 and 2 together and give me a leg up in life at an early age so that it doesn't die. Itachi shook his head, there are holes in that story. Screw the holes. Naruto spat, slamming his fist into the headboard, corrosive chakra making it smoke. He wasn't the only one getting pissed. I'm trying to save the life of someone important to me. Same reason you became a missing nin. Calm the hell down, Jiraiya said sternly, you're in no position to be throwing a temper tantrum. Kyuubi's Jinchuriki leaves the village, we're obligated to go after him. Matter of national security. Naruto seethed. This is a matter of international security. You're not helping yourself by arguing, kid. Or by letting cute and fuzzy out to play. The demon container reigned in the fox's chakra. Deep breaths. And Hinata? Itachi asked pointedly, how will she react when she hears her boyfriend's abandoned her home? Naruto sighed, I don't know. Her safety's most important, though. Itachi nodded and rearranged the compress on Sasuke's head. Jiraiya looked like he was going to start beating his own head against a wall. No, you, he pointed at Naruto, are going to sit your ass down, wait for your friends to wake up, and then come back home with me. You, he pointed at Itachi, can sign yourself up for a toad summoning contract and begin submitting regular reports to myself about Akatsuki's behavior. You're not getting it, Iro-senin, Naruto growled, this has to be done. With or without your approval. I'll take my name being dragged through the mud to ensure my village is safe. Jiraiya took a deep breath. You are not becoming a missing nin. You're not my damn guardian. Naruto said. Then, realizing just what that sounded like, decided he might as well top off the 12-year-old act and jumped out the window. I don't know what happened exactly, but I'm here if you want to talk, Hinata said, limping up to him. The blonde sucked in a guilty breath, the bastard sent you to get me. Me and Sasuke, she said, accepting his arm around her waist and leaning against him. I just found you first. They lapsed into silence. Naruto's mouth went to her cheek, she tilted her head up and their lips met. The street was on the outskirts of town, there was no one around, the sun was going down, it was pretty much the date they'd been hoping for last night. He breathed in through his nose and gathered her up, using chakra to get them both up and over the railing around the roof of the nearest building. Even less chance of anyone walking in on them here. Hinata pressed her hands to his face and pulled him down to her, backing up into the siding and letting him steady himself with hands on either side of her. The sun was shining in his eyes and the breeze was getting her hair in his face, but this was perfect. The kunoichi arched into him, hands moving down his neck, his front. She unzipped his jacket and moved her hands over his torso. He mimicked her, untying the wrap she'd put on to expose his favorite tank top of hers and gripping her hips. Hinata sucked lightly on his lip, then moved to his neck, kissing and nibbling down his collar, while he just breathed her in. Naruto, she kissed right next to his ear, tell me what happened. I can't, he said, finding her mouth again. He couldn't tell her. Absolutely not. She pulled away, you keep a lot of secrets from me. I think you trust me, but please don't ask, Hinata, he said, staring at her. She bit her lip, I know Naruto-kun does everything for the best and that he saved my life during the invasion and helped me become so much more, she stuttered, but I worry because Jiraiya-sama said that you wanted to leave. And she started to cry. Naruto froze. He was exactly where he was during the mission to Wave. And despite how strong she'd gotten, how she could stare down Neji, Tsunade, her family, how she could jump into the path of an S-ranked criminal without a second thought, the fact remained that Hinata was dependent on him. It was disastrous, terrifying to see this woman so in need of his presence and approval. He remembered her shy, remembered her strong and firm, remembered fighting with her, once, and she'd near twisted herself out of shape in anger, but she'd never broken. Was this Hinata, without a spark? Without her own will of fire? And he couldn't pause here. It would have been better to back away and tell her she was strong on her own, maybe even to leave and let her take the hit. God, Hinata, needing someone this much. and piece herself back together with that strength she'd shown him before, but he didn't. He grabbed her and pulled her down onto the roof with him, muffled her crying with his mouth, wiped away her tears. "Not you. I would never, ever leave you." She was 100% his right now. He kissed her on the jaw, on the neck, over her heart, between her solar plexus, ribs, right above the navel, back up to her lips. She didn't move. He'd never touched her like that, never gone farther than he thought would make her uncomfortable. But now she was just looking at him and, God, she was kissing him back, pulling on his hair, her legs wrapping around his middle. Having her this close felt so good. And then there was a wetness, and he realized this body was 12, Hinata was 12, and wasn't used to this much stimulation, yet. He scrambled off of her and sat nearly a foot away, trying to settle himself and tying his jacket around his waist to attempt to hide the evidence of what they'd been doing. Hinata had it a little easier than him because her shirt was long and the dampness was in a place that would be difficult to see, regardless. He couldn't think for a moment, only panting and staring at the ground, then stiffening when she moved herself over to him and sat down in his lap, giving him another deep kiss. No hard feelings. Still, "I'm sorry." "I'm not," she said, tears gone, though she was still sniffing a bit. "I love you." "I love you, too," he said. "I'm sorry you keep having to put up with this shit." She shook her head, kissing him again. He broke the kiss and tucked his chin over her head. The sun had gone down. Now it was just cold. Somewhere in the village, a clone was discussing his defection with Tsunade. Another one was discussing Madara's plan with Itachi. No one else knew it yet, but he was no longer a Konohinin. But he could wait a bit longer. For Hinata. A soft pressure on her cheek. Hinata turned and searched for the owner's lips and smiled softly into the kiss, eyes still closed. She shifted, trying to get comfortable on the wall she'd fallen asleep against and attempting to salvage what warmth the night would let her have. The jacket not yet cooled by the morning air was wrapped around her and she breathed out, "NKU. Cold." Another kiss was pressed to her temple and she fell asleep again. 3 women traveling the countryside alone was enough to make anyone suspicious. In fact, it downright screamed ninja. To those not in the know about these things, however, the 3 ladies were just another set of faces that could be easily forgotten. But, as any lecher would know, a set of like Tsunades wouldn't leave the memory of the local men anytime soon. "Damn fine, for an older woman," the old man chortled, "and her nieces. MMPH. "Thank you," Jiraiya said, smiling, and punched the pervert in the gut. "Now, if you wanna keep whatever you've got on you, you'll tell me which way they went." He brought out a Konoha forehead protector that had a slash carved through the village's design. "They're runaways of your military, citizen." The man quickly fessed up anything he knew about the 3, eyes shifting nervously to the 2 kids that were with the white-haired man. Sasuke looked murderous, with a hand that stayed at his belt at all times, likely on some sort of weapon. The other was Hinata, who probably looked like she'd start crying at any moment. Both sported a forehead protector identical to the one the white-haired ninja was bobbing up and down, minus the slash, and thus both could probably be counted on to kick his ass just as well as the senior could if he tried anything, not that he was that stupid. Hinata, for the most part, just tried not to cry. Sasuke had done a decent job of talking her out of a panic attack this morning already, and she didn't want to put him through that again. No matter the fact that she'd spent more time with him than probably any girl in the village, Sakura not included, he was still uncomfortable around her and her tears. He was also gruff in any comfort that he offered and probably would move into slapping her into her senses if she kept it up. Naruto had left. He'd left her. Right after he told her he wouldn't leave, he left. And she didn't understand why. Jiraiya had told them both about the possibility of Naruto going missing for whatever reason. Though the news had startled her, she noted that the Avengers' reaction was nothing short of stupefied, as well. For the most part, Hinata was aware that Naruto was of the steadfast belief that Sasuke would abandon the leaf in the future. She was also aware of his earnest efforts to prevent that from happening. Extensive training, team bonding, and gentle steering in the direction that would aid the Avenger as best as Naruto knew. And Naruto knew better than almost anyone. He'd been the one to train with her when even she thought she was hopeless. She hadn't been paying attention to it, but during the exams she'd acknowledged that since they'd started dating, she'd become bolder. Still shy, still embarrassed when all attention was on her, but her stutter was mostly gone, and her posture she straightened up. Naruto wouldn't want her to slouch had improved tremendously. She could now look the person she was speaking to in the eye and didn't hesitate to correct someone when they made an error or decided a little too quickly for Hinata. Naruto had been her first kiss. Right there, in that dark training field, with all the pokey shrubs and dewy grass, that was where Naruto had told her his biggest secret and kissed her. She shifted, gripping her arms and pretending to look to her right, while actually burying her nose into the collar of his jacket. It still smelled like him. Like soap and boy. They used that field to train after that. Many times, Hinata had been pushed against the bark of a tree and kissed senseless, driven to completely unfair distraction by his hands. He could massage her head gently after several minutes of attempting to kick it and succeeding a few times, or pin her arms up beside her and tickle her neck, only to be released as soon as her heart rate had settled and given just enough time to dodge before a chakra-charged fist landed where she'd been. Then they'd go home. Recently, she'd started staying over and sleeping with him on his warm mattress. He was a cuddler. She could wake up with him having curled up against her, so they were nestled like spoons or half on top of him because he'd pulled her over onto his chest. She'd woken up alone before. Been ready to get ready alone, like always, but then been surprised by him in the kitchen, instant donut smelling like sugar and cocoa, scrambled eggs and mini hot dogs. The gutsy ninja on the coffee table. It was so domestic. Like she was allowed to get used to him whining about needing her help to get a stain out of his shirt or putting her shoes next to his at the end of the day. And she had gotten used to it. To him singing the same 3 lines of a song that he refused to learn the actual lyrics to while he washed his hair, or to him hugging her unexpectedly from the side and kissing her cheek. And it hadn't been a day yet and she missed it. If they didn't find him and get him back, she would be coming home to an empty apartment. She didn't think anything could feel worse. She found the thing that could feel worse. Tracking Naruto herself when he was doing his utmost best to hide from her, that could feel worse. Finding that the henge he'd taken on also did that squinty thing with her eyes that he did when he got upset, that could hurt. Watching him spring 2 traps on Jiraiya and Sasuke and then feel their eyes on her when Naruto just walked up to her, that felt terrible. Naruto. She wouldn't cry. The henge disappeared and all that was left was him in his white shirt with a miserable expression on his face. Hinata. His arms went out to her and he crushed her to his chest. His fingers were in her hair, mouth on her eyes and cheeks and lips, and his entire front up against her entire front, completely open for her to incapacitate him with a gentle fist. But she didn't. She couldn't. Neji would no doubt be satisfied to hear that no matter the strides she'd made toward being a skilled kunoichi, when it came to doing her duty and stopping a missing nin, she couldn't do it. Instead she clutched at his shirt, kissed him hard, pressed up against him, desperate for him to change his mind. Did he want more of what they'd done on the roof? That was fine. She'd do it. If it was Naruto, she wouldn't mind. He wanted her body. He had it. But please don't go. I'll be back, he promised between kisses. No. You can't let this hold you back. No. I'll miss you. Then don't leave me. I'll think of you every day. I'll think of you every hour. Every time I'm called to duty, it will be because you made me into a ninja. Remember what we talked about. You have to become the Hyuga head. It's the only way to change things around with the Hyuga clan. You have to keep going, keep training. If that's what you want, I'll do it. But it won't happen like it would if you were there to help. You're amazing, Hinata. You're strong and smart and beautiful, and I'm absolutely in love with you. I'm in love with you. Please forgive me. No. I don't understand. You have to tell me why, before I forgive you. But none of the words would come, and all she could do was stand there, let him kiss her and feel his words resonate. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Why would Naruto just leave? Why not explain first, or show her why? She could understand if he'd explain. And then, to her great surprise, she felt angry. Why didn't he trust her? Why wouldn't he tell her, instead of running away? Didn't anything they'd faced together, the wave mission, the exam, the curse seal, didn't any of what she'd done indicate how far she was willing to go for him? Why wouldn't he just trust her? Her fingers quickly blocked his chakra pathways, making him stiffen, and she was about to give him a piece of her mind when her Byakugan caught it. She hadn't been as scared of the Kyuubi as she thought she'd be since she learned that it was inside Naruto, but now she was getting an idea of why they were so coveted because Naruto was cancelling out the gentle fist. The blocked arteries were bursting open from the demon's chakra and she could do nothing but watch as Naruto casually made the only fighting style she knew absolutely useless. Caught in Naruto's grip as she was, she couldn't dodge the senbon that sailed past him from Tsunade's apprentice to settle into her left hip and sagged against the blonde as the fast-acting drug that coated it did its work. With effort, she met his eyes and slurred, "I won't forget." Whether that was what he'd done or what they'd planned for her to do in regards to her clan or just this anger that was blooming in her chest at Naruto and how stupid he could be sometimes, she could tell. And then she blacked out. Hinata cried for a long time. She cried when she went back to their apartment and it was empty. She cried when she had to use Naruto's shampoo because hers had run out. When she fell asleep in his bed, his scent around her made her sob so long and hard that she became dizzy. She cried when she saw his shelf of raiment in the morning and when she opened a training scroll to find a cheery note from him telling her to do her best in her fight with Neji during the exam. On the 3rd day, she could no longer claim she was recovering from injury and had to meet with her team to train that morning. She arrived wearing one of Naruto's shirts under her old bulky jacket and with his abandoned forehead protector in her pocket. Kiba swore he'd drag Naruto's stupid ass back to Konoha for her. Shino offered silent comfort. Gurenai said something about being sorry it happened to her and offering her a place to stay if she didn't want to live at home or at Naruto's apartment. Hinata declined and went through the motions of training stiffly despite her pounding headache. On the fourth day, she began to unpack what she and Naruto had brought with them on the mission. Sasuke and Sakura came by around when she was going to make herself some lunch, and the three gloomily sat at Naruto's table in Naruto's kitchen and swallowed Naruto's ramen. "You can't do this," Sasuke said eventually, setting down his chopsticks. "Even if he's gone insane, he wouldn't want you to be upset over this. Am I supposed to be something else?" Hinata asked blankly. "The last thing he said to you was that he didn't want you to let this hold you back," the Uchiha answered. "If you're upset with him, don't let him get to you. If you're in love with him, then listen to what he told you." Hinata's expression did not change. "I'm both." "Hinata," Sasuke said, a little more awkward, "we know how you feel. Naruto, you lost a boyfriend and we lost a teammate. But you need to stay strong for your village." "He was my strength," Hinata said, a little forceful. "Did you pay attention to anyone back at the academy? I was pathetic. I couldn't fight, I stuttered all the time, couldn't keep eye contact. And look at you now," Sakura spoke over her, smiling at the dark-haired girl. "You beat your cousin, last year's Rookie of the Year, who had a full year of field experience over you, in battle. You can stare down Sasuke Uchiha," said Sharingan user huffed slightly at her, teasing. "You charged an S-class nin head on." "Because Naruto was there," Hinata argued. "Naruto's the reason for all of these things. He's been behind everything I've done since we graduated." "Not everything," Sakura said gently, "the decision not to go after him, that's all you." Hinata stilled. "You followed him to Wave," Sasuke recalled, thinking back to Team 7's first C rank. "And this time, you let him go." Sakura said wisely, "And that takes strength. And courage. And not just belief in Naruto's belief in you, you had to believe in yourself to do that." Hinata tried to find whatever it was she felt towards Naruto. She missed him, badly. She hadn't felt this low since they'd begun dating, but if they did, she could be sure his steady arms would be there to take away some of the badness. She knew that somehow, what he was doing was for the best. She didn't know how or understand why, but he wouldn't do this for no reason, and he was bound to have a good one. And underneath that, behind want for his kisses and being pressed into vertical surfaces and blind faith, there was anger. She'd done what he told her, hadn't she? Hadn't she proven that she'd be loyal to him, despite his secret keeping? Did he, for whatever reason, believe that she didn't love him back? What more could she do? "He wanted me to become Hyuga head," Hinata said, eyes getting harder. "I'd hate to disappoint him." Sakura's smile widened and Sasuke looked about as hopeful as an Avenger could look. "That's a start. Naruto always has a plan," Sasuke said, "and he always stuck with Kakashi's those who abandon their comrades are worse than trash saying. He hasn't abandoned us. Naruto wanted me to become a medic and he had a point," Sakura said, "I've been making good progress since I got started." "He had a point with sealing, too," Sasuke mused. "But he's an idiot," Hinata said bitterly, and the other two looked surprised. "Maybe he somehow knows exactly what we're capable of and maybe he's a genius fighter or leader, but he should tell us when he has a plan. He can't just go off by himself." Sasuke's face mirrored the Hyuga's, "We'll get him back." In the meantime, Sakura clasped her hands together decisively, "He left us jobs." Sasuke nodded and got up. Sakura followed, intent on spending the rest of the day getting dirty, sweaty and sore in a training field. Hinata removed her bulky tan jacket and pulled on Naruto's orange one, then went after her. The Hyuga did not approve of Hinata's feelings toward Naruto. The Hyuga didn't approve of how she wore his jacket around, gaudy compared to the clean pastels they favored. The Hyuga had mixed feelings about her moving back into the compound, had they been appalled at her living with a demon brat, or were they glad to be rid of a failure. These emotions smoothed out over the course of almost 10 months, because Hinata was no failure anymore. There would soon come a time when she would have to stop wearing that orange eyesore, and Naruto's reputation was swiftly forgotten by the general public due to his absence. No one could say Hinata didn't train hard. Her instructors continued to be amazed at her fast progress, though they were scandalized at her asking after non-Jaiukin techniques and quick thinking. She beat Hinabi back every time and was able to keep up with Neji, for the most part. This was not the scared of her own shadow 12-year-old who couldn't take down her little sister. Of course, Hinata was friendly. The children of the branch house loved her and she was fast friends with one of her cousins, Akemi, who was a brand new genin Kunoichi. She enforced bonding with her sister now, dragging her out for shopping several times a month. Well, Hinabi shopped. Hinata mostly tried things on and put them back, her money all went to paying for Naruto's apartment. She shared fairly pleasant conversation with Neji from time to time, even. The Hyuga approved, with reluctance. "Must you always wear that thing? He's been marked for death for at least a year now. Why does it matter to you? The Hyuga do not need to be associated with Uzumaki." Even if Naruto is a missing nin, he changed me for the better. This is a reminder. This was met with a stern, disapproving silence. Hinata excused herself. It's late. Where are you going? Hinata turned and gave a respectful bow. Otu-sama. I am going to return Naruto-san's jacket to his apartment. I've outgrown it, so it's better to keep it with his other things, now. May I accompany you? Hinata hesitated. Of course. Hiashi nodded and fell into step beside her. You have changed much since your academy years. Thank you. And I've had ample opportunity to guess at the cause. Hinata felt his eyes on the jacket and moved it to her other hand, away from him, like he might snatch it from her. Hiashi sighed. You will be going to your second Chunin exam soon, will you not? Yes, she said, in grass. The Hyuga head was silent for a moment. Naruto Uzumaki is not your hero, do you understand? Hinata sucked in a breath, the sacrifice he made at the time of his birth. It could be argued that he is the village's savior. But he is not your hero. Naruto Uzumaki never once did anything for you, Hiashi said, you are not indebted to him. I am glad you seem to know this now. Never once? Hinata asked, voice uncomprehending. How about when I beat Neji? Or all the times we spent training? True, Uzumaki somehow tapped the potential that we thought you had none of, Hiashi ceded, but the training offered by a genin, even one with his capacity for power. That's not it, Hinata shook her head. At all. Naruto was my teacher. He was my friend. ILO, but she couldn't admit it to her father quite yet, though it seemed like he had no trouble guessing what that L word was. Uzumaki Naruto has abandoned the village hidden in the leaves, Hiashi said. He hasn't abandoned anything. Abandoning would mean he has no intention of seeing this place again. You cannot expect that he would return to you. Hyuga in general didn't gape, but if Hinata needed to describe her father's expression, that was the best word for it. She nodded. The emotion on his face disappeared and she was scared for a moment that he might hit her and how she should react if he did. And not to me, she said quickly, then winced at the stutter. Not to me, she said again, at least, not just for me. Naruto-kun always has a plan, she said by way of explanation. The person he's currently on the run with is Tsunade of the Sannin. Jiraiya-sama has hinted that Naruto's gone for some reason of his own, and I don't find that difficult to believe. Naruto will return to this village. And then, Hiashi raised an eyebrow, and then. Hinata exhaled, Naruto gave me the task of becoming Hyuga head in the meantime, and I would rather lose my eyes than disappoint him. She met her father's gaze steadily. She could hear her blood rushing in her ears. Her father didn't say anything else, merely continued on benignly in the direction of Naruto's apartment, and Hinata stumbled after him. Having her father in their apartment was weird. There were photographs of Naruto and Hinata around, only two, but they were hung up and easy to see, and Hinata stiffened a bit when he stopped to look at them. After folding the shirt again and putting it in Naruto's closet, she returned to the living room to ask her father if he wanted to maybe have tea before they left, perhaps make another attempt at that father-daughter relationship, or at least try and scrape together the kind that she'd need to succeed him. To her surprise, he'd removed the picture of Naruto and Hinata from the wall and was gazing intently at it, bloodline active. Hinata, he said, have you used the Byakugan inside the apartment? She frowned, no. Well, once or twice, maybe, when I was looking for something. Hiashi turned the picture over and removed the back of the frame, then pulled the photograph out. On the back was a black seal, painted lightly so that it wouldn't bleed through to the front. Hinata's breath caught in her throat. She didn't recognize anything on it really, except that she knew it wasn't an exploding tag, so she immediately took it and charged it with chakra. Nothing happened. Perhaps blood? Her father asked, a calculating expression on his face. She took out a kunai and sliced it over her thumb, then touched it to the paper. Poof. A young-looking but definitely not small. Toad blinked up at them. Hello? He said. I'm Gamakichi. You got any snacks? Too many dreams about the old Hinata. Too many dreams of pearly teeth disappearing behind a mysterious smile, wide eyes crinkling in happiness, long dark sweet-smelling hair, soft skin, neat fingers, and the way they moved over his flesh. How it felt to touch her. He woke up thinking she was next to him too often, and his frustration had Kyuubi hissing at him for calling on his emotion-fueled chakra without legitimate reason. Too many dreams of waking up next to her. She always woke up before him, though he wasn't asleep for long. His tendency of clinging to her in sleep meant she had to wrestle herself away from him in the mornings. Too many dreams of what it was like to kiss her. To taste her mouth, feel her tugging on his hair, moving his hands over her body and gripping her to him, the press of her against his chest and her breath in his ear. Too many dreams of her in his lap, legs crossed firmly behind his back, hips rolling in time with his, blush spreading across her neck, and a wicked smile on her face. Do you like that, Naruto-kun? Too many dreams about the stupidest things. The fight about whether or not his last battle with Sasuke had been justified, and what should I have done? Even if I hadn't been seeking him out, it's my duty as a ninja to apprehend missing nin. He'd yelled, "When it comes to you and Sasuke, nothing is about duty." She hissed back. The time he'd nearly cut off her finger with a poorly aimed Rasengan and the small panic attack he'd had afterwards. The one time she caught him masturbating in the shower because she'd come in to grab nail polish. Tsunade had had it with him moping after the first week and endeavored to keep him busy even while they were traveling by having him recite poisons, vital points, names of old village leaders, any distracting thing she could think of that kept him from looking like a run-over dog. He made clones, left them places so that they could train for him while he walked, then tried to weasel more techniques out of the two Kunoichi. It wasn't terribly hard, even if he couldn't use most of their jutsu due to having terrible chakra control. He thought about this Hinata. How dependent she was. How different in her quick growth and paradoxical reliance on him. How she managed to kindle the same protective, lusting, proud urges in him as she had always done, even different as she was. He thought about her and did his best to stop. There was very little he could do to amuse Tsunade. Then again, once someone realizes you've been masking your emotions, the cat was out of the bag the same night he met Tsunade, which was a record if you didn't count Neji, unless they were also some level of twisted, like Kakashi, they wouldn't typically play along. She knew he was running away from Konoha too and that he kept in contact with someone who had slaughtered one of Konoha's most elite clans, but that he nonetheless claimed that what he was doing was for the good of Konoha. The Sannin had managed to keep her nose out of it for a while, as opposed to Shizune, who inquired and immediately gained the information she desired from the genin, but promised to keep it quiet so that Naruto would be the one Tsunade would have to ask. But after an in-person encounter with Itachi Uchiha, she decided she actually had to know what was going on with her companion for her own well-being. The speech about teamwork, friendship and love for Konoha that followed probably could have taken down Kakashi, Iruka and the late Hokage, but it made no visible dent in the busty medic nin. Whatever those were full of, it wasn't compassion. But it might have just been her way of going about things like this, because the next morning was the first one that Naruto woke up drenched in ice water and dodging senbon flung by an amused Shizune, who swore that it was all her mentor's idea. Tsunade's face stopped twisting into a scowl at the mention of returning one day, but Naruto didn't bring it up. Yet. Naruto had allowed himself 1 year to wake up at dawn every day, run, swim or climb a course Tsunade had charted out for him, then choke down a hearty meal with enough protein to justify the soreness he had to work out of his muscles each morning, and spend the rest of the day sparring with his clones or dodging Tsunade's punches, accidentally almost shattering his left kneecap to splinters once, to the woman's ire, topping it off with an evening of increasing his chakra capacity. In quiet moments, when he wasn't moping or answering Tsunade and Shizune's 20 questions, he thought about how to get through to the members of the Akatsuki, though having Itachi on his side already guaranteed kiss him, for whom Itachi was the closest thing to a friend the Shark Man had probably ever had. Madara didn't want to be part of a village, but would be open to quitting Akatsuki sometime soon. Haiden wouldn't approve of Madara's plan, once he heard it, not near chaotic enough. Sasori only needed a good talking to, as did Nagato, and Konan would just come with him. Kakuzu only cared about money, which meant he likely wouldn't be able to sway him unless Tsunade hadn't yet drunk and gambled away her grandfather's fortune and was decided to give the majority of it away to a missing nin in an attempt to stop him from destroying the village, unlikely. And that got just about everyone, except Orochimaru, who wasn't even part of the Akatsuki anymore. Tobi, he couldn't stand the little creep and vowed to end his life as soon as he was able, and Zetsu, no comment. Fun, fun, fun. The Toads kept him updated on Konoha life, telling him about Sakura's volunteering at the hospital, Sasuke's interest in a lookalike named Sai, who was much better with a brush than him, Hinata's reaching out to the branch house, and her increasing handle on her family life. More importantly, they told him about the village politics and the general description of the Anbu sent to apprehend them. With the tips, they'd managed to remain hidden for now. Naruto didn't want any charges of acting against Konoha, even because of self-defense. Then months with no sign of the three ninja, however, had managed to lull the harried Konoha leaders into believing they would lie low for now, and as a result, Konoha's honchos turned their attention inwards. Jiraiya wasn't invited to very many meetings now that Danzo had stuck his foot in the door, but new laws were made available to everyone. Naruto mainly had his eye on the one that allowed all homes to be searched for harmful devices or information by which our glorious nation could be harmed without warrant. So far, these searches had turned up nothing but honest-to-God infiltrators, so their presence hadn't been questioned. Actual threats weren't likely to be that stupid though, so these criminals had probably been either planted or immediately spotted by Rude and allowed to stay until they could be used to prove the necessity of the law. Danzo was gaining power. No one in their group of 3 was very happy about that, so, 12 months in, Tsunade and Shizune were sent on their way to interrupt Team 10, who were on a downtime mission to escort a wealthy woman to her equally wealthy sisters, information thanks to Gamakichi, and plead their case with a competent jounin. Asuma wouldn't be as easily swayed by their story as Kakashi, who put their teammates above others on a high pedestal, but he wasn't likely to engage the two women in battle without provocation, either. And if, for some bizarre reason, he did, Shikamaru was there to convince him not to. Almost immediately after Tsunade's departure, Naruto realized that if he wanted to have any chance of convincing Kakuzu to switch sides, he'd still need an insane amount of money just to get him to keep a conversation quiet. At each village that he came to, if he had the energy, teams of clones were released. Two brothers, a young couple, a mother and her adolescent son, etc., to go find work. Despite feeling the loss and getting quite a bit huffy at the constant leeching of his chakra, the fox understood why it was being done and aided the blonde in charging each humanoid with anywhere from 2 weeks to a month's worth of chakra. Then, after a week of light exercise and resting up, it was time to go hunt down Snake Face. It seemed that Orochimaru didn't take kindly to Naruto's killing his assistant because the first thing he did when Naruto approached him was attack. "Cut that out." Naruto shouted, "I'm here because I want to make a deal with you." Fukuku, the Sannin chuckled around an engorged tongue, "A loyal Konohinin wants to make a deal with me. I don't have a forehead protector to prove it, but I'm a missing nin now," Naruto said, "and I know you're not still loyal to Akatsuki, so I'm gonna come out and say it. Help me destroy their leader." He didn't let up on his stance, though, ready for whatever the immortal was going to throw at him. "Pain?" Orochimaru asked, smile widening, "Are you sure you want that? Don't you want to make sure you know who he is first?" "What are you talking about? Did you never wonder where you came from, Naruto Uzumaki?" Naruto racked his brain, eager not to beat around the bush. "Is this about Pain actually being Nagato?" Orochimaru's face blanked. "I know he and I are related, distantly. But he's not Akatsuki's real leader." "Oh? The guy you want? Well, actually, I want, because I'm going to kill him, is Madara Uchiha." Name ring a bell. And that was how he ended up spending the night in the lair of one of his oldest enemies. "Boss. Hey, boss. Gamakichi." Naruto raised his eyebrows in surprise and automatically looked around to see if anyone was gawking at the giant toad, despite being in a forest. "It's good to see you, but why are you here?" "Hinata found the seal. She summoned me." The toad blinked up at him, not too much of an effort since he was about the size of a Great Dane now. "Did she say anything?" Gamakichi blinked at the urgency in his tone. "But it had nearly been a year." "Not much. Just asked who I was, gave me some sweets. Mostly, I talked." The Jinchuriki suppressed a huff of irritation. Her father was there. That changed things. "Did he?" "Stayed real quiet and listened, just like Hinata." Gamakichi blinked again and rearranged his limbs, webbed toes moving around each other gracefully. "I told them that you were training with Tsunade to take down a threat to Konoha and that Tsunade was going to return to Konoha soon." Naruto mulled this over. "Have you said anything like this to Jiraiya?" "Not yet. Can you?" "As soon as possible, so that he's established everything with Tsunade before the shit hits the fan in Konoha and so that he can speak up for her when she and Shizune arrive." Gamakichi nodded and waited patiently for his summoner to say more. Naruto paced. If Hinata found the seal, that meant she could summon Gamakichi whenever she activated it, which would mean communicating with her. He hoped that a year had been enough for her to learn to rely on herself some more, but if not, then so be it. Trying to keep his distance from her in the same village couldn't possibly be any more miserable than what he was doing now. "You don't fight with your dad very often, do you?" Sakura asked and pushed a bottle of chocolate sauce towards Hinata. Sasuke didn't say anything, serenely sucking the dessert off of his spoon and watching the Hyuga. This was supposed to be an afternoon crashed on Sakura's couch watching a documentary of natural poisons, but they'd sacrificed it for the heiress's boy problems. Hinata huffed her bangs out of her eyes. "I didn't know what to do. I understand where he's coming from, but it's a chance to actually talk to Naruto." A weird itchy feeling was bothering her. She tucked her face into her hands like she was rubbing it tiredly and silently activated her bloodline. "There. A spy outside the house, in the tree in the far corner of Sakura's yard. So you gave the seal to your father, anyway?" Sasuke asked, just to make sure. Before she could get it, he snatched a bag of chocolate chips off the table and poured it into his bowl. "He turned it into the council right after we found it so that there wouldn't have been any time for us to even look at it," Hinata said. She tapped the table idly, waiting for her turn for chocolate. Location being watched. Sasuke paused in helping himself, then gave himself about another fourth of a cup before passing the bag off to Hinata and rapped his knuckles on the underside of the wood while waiting for Sakura to finish with the whipped cream. "Hawk's home?" Hinata gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Here? Whipped cream?" Sakura asked, closing the fridge quietly and turning around with a tub. "Yes," Hinata said with emphasis, not looking away from the Avenger. "Anyway, it's interesting about those new laws Councilman Danzo's backing, isn't it?" Sasuke shrugged. "I can't remember." His stance was laid back and he was chewing 2 maraschino cherries lackadaisically, but his black eyes were intent on Hinata's white ones. The ones about confiscation of jutsu? It's a shame. I found a great medical text about cell deterioration and chakra affinity, but I had to submit it for a scan through the new Academy division before I could read them. Sakura said. I heard that they're going to section off people by rank and give them passes to material that way. That's annoying. Sasuke said, breathing out through his nose. An awkward silence descended in which Sakura and Hinata both wanted to agree, but felt like their observer might get them in trouble for going against their glorious state, whoever he was. It was likely that, if they could hear them, the game was up already, but Hinata guessed that from the distance their spy was watching them through a window they couldn't do much but lip read and attempt to decipher the seemingly random knocks they made against the wood. How do you feel about a movie? Sakura asked. Does a documentary count as a movie? Sasuke asked. I think anything that can be watched on a screen counts, Hinata said, and quickly moved to draw the curtains on the windows that looked outside from the kitchen and living room. As soon as their watcher's view was blocked, the trio eyed each other uncertainly, not really sure of what to say that wasn't obvious. They were under suspicion of communicating with Naruto, and if Hinata's comment about wanting to talk to him had been caught, they were already in deep trouble. Sakura sighed, alright, I'm not pretending I actually am interested in seeing this documentary. The girls huffed and went about finding quilts and pillows for an afternoon viewing. But why did you have to hand it over? Hinata said with a put-out gesture, then crossed her arms over her chest defensively against her father's icy glare. We have plenty of seals that only Hyuga can activate, we even have hiding places in the house. Not that they were used often, since anyone with a Byakugan could see inside them. There were one or two meant for storing scrolls and valuables, and a few chambers underneath some of the branch housing that were compact but large enough to hold the Hyuga children should disaster, such as another tailed beast attack, strike. Do you have any idea what is going on in the politics of this village? Her father asked, looking angrier than she'd ever seen him. He was pacing. Councilman Danzo is considering taking the Hokage position, and the council is making decisions in the Hokage's stead for now, she said. And that new decree about searches without warrant of any citizen being acceptable. Her father breathed out slowly through his nose. You're woefully ignorant. Hinata shifted nervously, what's going on, Otu-sama? The Ashi's face remained hard as he met her eyes, not just searches without warrant. Confiscation of any material not explicitly permitted by the council. Well, yes, I knew that, Hinata said, it's inconvenient, but how bad could it? All clans have jutsu specifically tailored to them, and each one reserves the right to keep them a secret. If the Hyuga wished, we could cease teaching our style and techniques, and the gentle fist would die with us, the Hyuga head said. The same goes for the Yamanaka mind jutsu and the Nara shadow manipulations. Councilman Danzo wishes to be in control of where these jutsu go. Now that this decree is being enforced, it is only a matter of time until the compound is searched for documentation of our technique and it is taught to ninja outside our clan. Without the Byakugan, Hinata murmured, thinking back to spars where Naruto had impeded her vision. It's difficult to find the chakra pathways, but with practice, it's not impossible. The Ashi nodded, an opponent would be slowed down much better than with standard Taijutsu using Gentle Fist. But Hinata floundered, Gentle Fist uses a specific type of chakra. Our chakra. Hyuga are suited to the Gentle Fist. Even she, who was a black sheep in regards to her family's affinity for blocking chakra pathways, would be infinitely better at it than, say, Ino or Sasuke. Her chakra was meant for sneaking in and dealing damage. Ino's was meant for flying in and manipulating. Sasuke's for burning or electrocuting, as his personal case may be. The Ashi didn't comment, so she knew she was right. No one would ever perform the Hyuga's technique better than the Hyuga. But even more importantly, it's ours. It was her ancestors who had developed it, her wide-eyed grandparents, great-grandparents who'd struck down enemies to Konoha with painful pressure on organs and blockages of vital energy. Yes, it was a bloody history, ninja histories usually were, but it was hers. And here was that anger, again. That same flickering rage she'd felt when Naruto left, only now it wasn't her love who this was directed at, and she didn't care about the reasons behind the council's actions. This was a stupid attempt to grab power away from her clan, power that wasn't even suited to others. Councilman Danzo was not a good man. It is ours. But the Konoha's leaders have decided otherwise. Her father fixed her with a more familial, but no less serious glance. Hinata, we must be careful. We must not give Councilman Danzo any reason to believe the Hyuga are an enemy. This is why the seal had to be submitted to the council. If he thought that I knew where Naruto was, Hinata met her father's pupil-less eyes fearfully. I would not be heading the Hyuga any longer. Not as the father to a traitor. That's horrible. The clan was already inching towards a steep cliff in regards to main branch house relations, but the displacement of her father would hurl the whole thing into chaos. She didn't even want to think about how twisted everything could get should Danzo begin dipping his fingers into the Hyuga's affairs. Visions of the caged bird seal being given to younger and younger children at the academy to ensure there would be no more spilling of Konoha secrets one-hand seal and that missing Nin was dead before they ever left Fire Country's border. Imagine Konoha at war. She didn't want to. But she could. With the caged bird seal on her forehead, she would march into battle against whomever the council pointed her towards and would die an unknown soldier's death trying to claim more land for her glorious state. These are peaceful times, she tried. The calm before the storm, her father corrected. Storm. Did Naruto know any of this would happen? Oh, she prayed he did. She prayed he'd only keyed the seal into her and that the hospital no longer had any of the blood she'd donated the last time there had been a blood drive in the village. Surely, it would have been kept anonymously. No one needed to know who the previous owner of whatever samples the hospital collected was. So much had been left up to chance. She willed her heart to slow down. Tried not to think about how, at this very moment, there were likely to be unknown hands pawing through her and Naruto's belongings at their apartment. Do you know who this is? She swallowed. The coffee she'd had this morning was curdling in her stomach, she was sure of it. It's a frog. The orange skin had dulled down to a brown, grainy red around deep lacerations and nerve-rich areas of his limbs. Metal stakes had crudely pinned the joints to the table, like the former summon was only a biology specimen. He was missing the dark blue vest that he always wore. She'd wondered what the purpose of it was, since it couldn't possibly have kept the frog warm and it hadn't any pockets to hold anything. But maybe he'd been within his rights to want to wear a vest. She hadn't seen Naruto in over a year and wasn't looking to start dating anyone, but she'd been experimenting with makeup lately, partly for undercover mission purposes, partly out of interest. Oh gods, one of his eyes was open. Oh, wait, no, it has warts, it's a toad. It's huge a summon. Why would you kill a toad summon? I thought they were loyal to Konoha. It was secreting a filmy, clear fluid and the world was particularly cruel for making it look like a tear. There was not expression of pain on the toad's face, he looked nothing less than serene, but that one tear it was like it was there for her. Why did she have to turn in the seal? She could have lied the moment her father discovered it and played it off as Naruto not having looked for scratch paper when he'd come up with the design and quickly scribbling the idea down on the photograph. She wouldn't have needed to turn the damn thing in. No one would have had to die for something this goddamn stupid. I never met any of Naruto's summons. I actually forgot he had a contract. Gamakichi had liked fried crackers. He liked corny jokes and games. Did you find anything out about Naruto's whereabouts from him? No, but if we do, we'll keep you posted, Hyuga-san. Thank you. She hadn't cried like this since Naruto had left, only now it wasn't Naruto's teammates bearing witness, but her father. Why? She croaked, he was an agent of Konoha, he wouldn't even have disobeyed orders had a Konoha nin told him to look for Naruto. Not openly, but since he was killed we can conclude that when he was questioned about Uzumaki's whereabouts, he refused to give them up. No one even would have known about the seal if you hadn't turned it in. She rounded on him. I could have hidden it just fine. He didn't have to die. Where would you have hidden it? Where in the village can you hide something that even the Byakugan can't find it? Hiashi asked calmly. She swallowed, blinking back another wave of tears, unwilling to keep weeping in the face of his cool. Hinata, the clan is in danger. Oh, everyone was in danger. The village was in danger from outside forces, so they had to obey the ninja. The ninja were in danger of having their rights taken away from them by the council. The council was in danger of being called out on their blatant tyranny, and the clan was in danger from all of the above because Naruto had decided he needed to leave to fulfill his secret too risky to include anyone else's mission and taken off. She closed her eyes and remembered the feel of his steady frame behind her. The gentle press of his chin on her shoulder, the salt of ramen broth on his lips. Remembered the feel of being pressed into the roof underneath him, how he'd kissed her and promised he'd never leave. Now is not the time for tears, her father's voice interrupted. No. Definitely not. Refreshed by the memory of her hero even if he was a lousy one, he was the only person she knew who had an idea of what the hell he was doing, she looked at her father again. In these times of change, the Hyuga clan needs to remain strong. United. Hinata, you've been building a close relationship between the main and branch in the last year. Continue to do so. She licked her lips, does this mean? Yes, Hiashi looked weary. Not ready to bestow this on her, but having to do it out of necessity. Tomorrow, I will make the announcement and Hanabi will receive the caged bird seal. You will be the next Hyuga head. Naruto guessed something was up when he was reverse summoned back to Mount Maiboku. Even when he'd left the village this time around, the toads hadn't done this and the act must have meant something serious had occurred or they wouldn't have bothered. He was hoping it was just Jiraiya harping on them to do it so that he could talk to Naruto or Gamabunta wanting a drink, something stupid that would take up, like, 2 hours and would let him get back to traveling towards AIM and trying to decide if Snakeface should accompany him or not. But when he saw the face of Gamabunta, he couldn't breathe for a moment. He'd always felt tiny next to him. In general, Gamabunta made him feel small, with his deep voice and his way of throwing his weight around, both literal and metaphoric. Naruto Uzumaki. You were my son's summoner. Gamakichi. W were? Naruto blinked rapidly. W where is he? He felt his heart sink down to somewhere near his large intestine. We were hoping you could tell us. Naruto's heartbeat in his ears. He swallowed. His mouth was dry. The last time I spoke, I asked him to talk to Jiraiya about how I was with Tsunade and she would be coming home. He felt the beginnings of tears build up behind his eyes. Why? A jutsu that allows us to dispel upon life-threatening danger, which keeps our young from dying when they are accidentally summoned by new additions to the scroll. It also keeps tabs on them. Gamakichi disappeared from the scroll yesterday. There was no need to explain what that meant. Hot, fat tears began spilling onto his face. How? How the hell can that happen? Naruto didn't care about the way the Toad boss was watching him silently or how his dusty shirt was probably leaving streaks on his face. How the hell did a jutsu that wasn't even touched in the previous timeline, that hadn't been thought twice about by him before, fail? Gamabunta was still quiet. Watching him. This would be the first time they met this time around and it wasn't going at all like Naruto had hoped it might. The first time around was better. Less tears, snot and grief settling over everything. Finally, the giant toad sighed. It wasn't you. You didn't kill my son. Naruto swallowed, salt bitter in his throat, and glared back at the gargantuan summon. I would never ask him to do anything that I thought would hurt him, he said, gritting his teeth. I don't use my friends. Gamabunta closed his eyes and sighed wearily. Jiraiya is being reverse summoned next. You need to focus on where you were before so we can send you back before he comes. No, Naruto breathed, I need to talk to him. He scowled and felt Kurama's chakra unravel from his stomach and spread through him like the warmth from a stiff drink, extending his canines and bleeding into his irises. I need to find out who did this. Jiraiya didn't even wait to hear the reason behind his summoning. Upon seeing Naruto, he dealt the blonde a swift blow to the ear and watched him fumble around before the Jinchuriki attempted to return the hit with what little balance he had. Pervert, the fuck was that for? Naruto growled, not really upset with Jiraiya, but happy to let some of his anger out. You know what it was for, brat. The older ninja growled, don't think you're getting away from me after this. Jiraiya, Gamabunta boomed, stop screwing around. The seal master stilled and turned to look at the toad, features smoothing out as he took note of the boss's tone. Naruto hadn't thought anything of it earlier, no time, but now he acknowledged that the normally rambunctious summon was much more subdued. Despite the toad's affinity for water, they would as a group forever be described as fiery by Naruto, but Gamabunta just sounded tired. Looked every inch the old soul that those who'd seen battle were. It wasn't fair when children died before their parents. Nothing was so eerie as seeing Jiraiya's face pale when Gamabunta described how they'd found out about Gamakichi. Damn it. The toad sage cried, sinking to the ground and punching it so hard his knuckles popped. I made that damn seal. They asked me for it. I thought it was for dealing with crow summons from grass. He punched the ground again, not hesitating despite how his fingers were limp. Naruto felt the urge to destroy things build again, but held it back, allowing his newly formed claws to dig into his palms and keep him grounded. So, that's how they trapped him. But how did they get him in the first place? Then he remembered. Hinata. The seal that he left her. The one Gamakichi responded to. Oh, please, no, he whispered under his breath. Two heads turned to him. He stared back at them with wide eyes. I left Hinata a seal to contact me with. Gamakichi went back and forth between us once, right before I sent him to you, he said to Jiraiya. Hinata had turned it in. Hinata was the reason. She wouldn't, he said quietly, trying to fathom why she'd turn him in if she really it had never been a question before. Did Hinata love him back? Had his departure spurred a complete 180 in regards to her feelings for him? No, she wouldn't, Jiraiya said to him. Naruto hadn't thought of Jiraiya in a comforting way since he'd met him here again, but there was something reassuring in the words. Granted, it could be that the sage was just trying to keep him from losing it, knowing that Hinata was part of the reason for his defection and not wanting to deal with an emotionally compromised container of the Nine Tails, especially so close to so many young toads, but it was mitigating all the same. Did anyone else know? The Ashi would. Jiraiya ceded. And then, if he turned the seal in, Danzo would find a way to use it. Inside Naruto, something snapped. Danzo, he breathed, malicious chakra leaking out and poisoning the air. That utter bastard. It wasn't ever fucking enough with him, was it? So this Danzo, Gamabunta said, ire now seeping into his sober tone, he is the one who killed my boy. And then Naruto realized how precarious the situation was. They were literally about 2 seconds away from Gamabunta going on a rampage in Konoha until he found the root leader and slaughtered him in revenge. Which wasn't likely to happen. Danzo had an entire army of brainwashed soldiers ready to keep him alive and another army who would defend their councilman, invasive policies or not, against a rampaging beast without even first pausing to think why a toad, traditional ally of Konoha, was attempting to kill him. He nervously met Jiraiya's eyes and the two of them shared a moment of panic before they turned back to the mammoth summon and attempted to calm him down. Naruto wasn't really a vain person, but he was immensely relieved when the toad's medic managed to replace his chipped front tooth. "It feels bigger," he told the brisk healer, tonguing the white square tenderly. "It is. You'll wear it down to normal size by eating and doing what you usually do," she said coolly, then offered him a green popsicle. "Here. Suck on it, it'll numb the pain." Spotting what looked like an iced grasshopper leg sticking out the side, Naruto gave an uneven smile and shook his head, polite pass. "I can barely even feel it, honest." A lie, but he'd take the throbbing in his mouth over crunchy bug bits any day. She huffed, "Man. Always trying to be tougher than you're smart." The toad let him go after that though, and he met up with Jiraiya, who was nursing two black eyes and a broken finger outside. The seal master met his gaze, and there was a moment where the two of them just smiled slightly at each other, thankful the day hadn't ended with a feud between Konoha and the toads, until Jiraiya smacked the back of his head. "You're a little shit." Naruto inhaled, then winced when the cold air hit his teeth, which were all sensitive for some reason. "Lem tell you what I've been up to."